Good morning. Can we try that again? Good morning. Oh, thank you. And good morning to the people who are joining us online, which are as or more numerous than the folks who are in the room. We're so happy that you are all gathered today. My name is Shelley McDermott Wadsworth. I am the director of the Military Family Research Institute and a distinguished professor of human development and family science at Purdue University. I'm very excited to be with you today as we celebrate this year's best new research on military and veteran families, and as we learn how we can work even better together to support their quality of life. I welcome you on behalf of our partners at Military Reach, who have worked with us to implement the Thompson Award for several years now. I'll say more about them a little later. I also want to recognize our gracious host. We're very, very grateful to be able to host this event in this beautiful facility at the Association of the United States Army. Today it feels like a well-kept secret, right? Because the entrance is still under construction, but we are very happy that you all found your way into this beautiful room. I would like to introduce you all to Karen Halverson. Karen is a California native and a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. She served 10 years on active duty before transitioning to the Individual Ready Reserve as a lieutenant commander. Today, she dedicates her time to volunteering with organizations that support service members and their families, including AUSA and the Arlington National Cemetery. Karen is here to bring greetings from our partners at AUSA. Please welcome Karen.
Hi, good morning. Again, Karen Halverson. I am one of the AUSA Family Fellows. I'm a veteran, I'm a military mom, and a military spouse. AUSA Family Programs is delighted to support your organization and event today. If you have any questions about AUSA or the Family Fellow role, please see me or Thea Green, who is running around, and she'll be your admin. There she is, and ask any questions that you have. I hope you have a wonderful event, and happy holidays to you all.
We are very pleased today to be joined by Mr. Stephen Simmons from the Office of Military, Community, and Family Policy in the Office of the Secretary of War. In his role, he oversees initiatives to strengthen military families, enhance quality of life, and foster resilience to support the warrior culture. During his 17-year career in the U.S. Marine Corps, Mr. Simmons served in critical leadership roles, including Site Commander, Operations Officer, and Retention Officer for the Marine Corps Total Force. Throughout his career, Mr. Simmons has been a tireless advocate for the service member and for military readiness. He played a pivotal role in elevating critical manpower readiness issues, shaping national policy discussions. Following his military service, Mr. Simmons led transformative logistics programs as a senior program manager at Amazon, improving North American delivery performance and leading the last mile performance operations team. As an advisor to the Walk the Talk Foundation, he championed veterans' rights while advocating policy reforms to bolster military readiness. Mr. Simmons holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a minor in leadership studies from Hardin-Simmons University. He's also a graduate of the Marine Corps Command and Staff College, Expeditionary Warfare School, and Weapons and Tactics Instructor course. His awards include the Meritorious Service Medal, 4 Navy Commendations Medals, and the Navy Achievement Medal. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Simmons.
All right. Well, Shelley, thank you for the wonderful introduction. That probably could have been about half the time, made me sound way more important than I am. Thank you all for being here, and really appreciate the work that has gone in from the entire group and your tireless efforts in this space, researching military family, the support that surrounds the military family. It wouldn't be possible without the tireless research and the insight from researchers like you. And just to give some perspective, we're looking at 11 papers here today. There's usually on average about 700 to 800 studies or papers that go out academic-wise a year. So to get to this point, that's an incredible achievement just to get here and for a paper to become a finalist. And I don't know what the total number was this year, but like looking back across years, I was doing a little bit of research, and it was 700, 800 different papers, and everybody's got an opinion about how we can support families better, but doing the actual deep academic research and getting those critical academic insights, it's a challenge. Usually there's a lot more exciting stuff when we talk about defense dollars and things like that. And, there's a lot of folks that are chasing, overseas threats and things like that. But the focus here at home, the domestic policy issues, absolutely critical. So before I get started, I'd be remiss to not say thank you to our namesake here today, Barbara Thompson. She's been a tireless advocate. She's an MCNFP alumni for 10 years. It's rare to be at a awards function that has your namesake attached to it, and you're still walking among us. So, Barbara, that is an incredible achievement. Thank you for everything you've done, but just honored to be here and honored to finally get to meet you here today. Now, let's talk about the research, right? And your efforts here strengthen military family readiness more than you know, because your insights, what that leads to is that leads to policy discussions, which eventually leads to policy reform. And I'm going to give kind of an example of why it's so important. Recently, we identified a gap in our policy areas, which was how we support military adolescents. And I'm pleased to announce that our Millennium Cohort Study of Adolescent Resilience, or the SOAR, that's been greenlit to move past an initial study, and we'll be doing 2 more tranches of data collection and analysis on that, which will represent the most comprehensive study on adolescent resiliency. And again, that's a result of many of your papers, many of the studies that have happened over the years talking about adolescents, but usually they're kind of on the periphery. We look a lot at our 5 and unders, and we look at a lot at spouses and veteran service members, but those adolescents, kind of like they can walk home from school, they can make themselves a peanut butter sandwich, so they're good, right? And we recognize it's not always the case, and so we're very excited to be working on that piece right there. It's a critical study, but it's one of thousands of studies out there. Now, we talked about youth resilience. That is one of the key focus areas that we have right now in MCNFP, not to lower any others, but when we talk about youth resilience, especially adolescent resilience, that's a strategic imperative. Statistically, military youth are more likely to raise their right hand and join service and follow in their footsteps. Even if they don't, their friends likely are, and we want that to be seen as a positive. Like we want them to have the choice. We want them to succeed if they choose to serve, but we also want them to tell their friends, hey, service is a good deal. And ultimately, we want service members to look at their service and say, this is a good choice for my family. And, to do that, we have to understand how we support adolescents. We have to understand how we make them the most successful folks. So even if they don't serve, we want our military members to look at them and say, my son, my daughter, they were successful because I served. And that's critical, not just for retention, but for recruitment long-term, as well as, the health of the next generation in total. So research and data. Let's talk about research and data real quick. One of the pushes that I've made a lot over the last 6 months, and Lee's probably heard this ad nauseum, so Lee, I apologize, you're gonna have to hear it again, is we oftentimes look backwards. We collect a lot of data, and I get a lot of research. I see a lot of papers say, well, here's what happened to the department in 2020, 2019, or 2024. While that's important, we have to look forward as well, be able to be predictive about what's coming next. What does this data tell us is going to happen next? Anybody can give me a history lesson, tell me what happened in the past, but how do you use that predictive analysis, build that correlation, and figure out how is this going to affect the future? And we What we've been working on in MCNFP is looking at the three R's: readiness, recruitment, and retention. Yeah, those are the three big things. And what we want to figure out is how do our programs, all our different efforts, I think all 100 different programs and everything else that we run, MCNFP in any given day, how does that influence recruitment? How does it influence retention? How does it influence military readiness? And there's a correlation there. We can look at data on a gigantic spreadsheet. Yes, we have one of those. Where if we look out at what happened in March, how's that going to affect retention in September? And I think your research in this area, it's critical because the insights you give that every time I read a paper, I'm like, okay, where does that fit into this model and how does that correlate? So finding those correlations is critical. I truly appreciate all the research you do. I read probably way more than anybody realizes. And then I'll come in usually Monday morning like, hey, Lee, I got a great idea. And Lee's like, here we go again. What did he read? But no, I truly appreciate it. Lastly, I'll talk about research. I think there's a tendency in the research community, especially when we talk about funding. I think there's a bad habit of like, how do I need to tell whoever's the grantor what they want to hear, or do I need to say all bad news and say how they're just messing it up? And I'd argue there's obviously a balance there, but what I always want is the truth. Like, if it's a bad news story, give me the bad news. If it's a good news story, give me the good news. But don't sugarcoat it either way. And I think we look at the research that goes into this. Our goals, it depends on a good positive relationship with every one of you and just being able to communicate openly. That's what my office is going to do for you, but ask you to do the same for us, because I think what we're ultimately trying to do is we're all working towards the same goal. How do we make it better? And anybody in this space, every one of you could probably come and tell me exactly what we need to do better right now. Well aware that let's research it, let's figure it out, so then we can build the right policy, build the right process, or the right mechanism to support our families and get them along the way. So the visibility you bring, the advocacy you bring as a result of that visibility, and you can trace it back. There's usually a military spouse or a service member who says, this is broken. A researcher says, that's interesting, let me study this. You study it, then it goes from there to generally a group of MSOs, VSOs will take it up, possibly even a congressional officer too. They'll say, hey, something's really not working here. Then we start to research it even further, and we say, aha, this is a problem. So how do we make sure that string is as rapid as possible, open as possible, and get it to a policy moment where we can actually develop a policy and implement that and move quickly on that and scale that policy so it actually works, and not just give it lip service and say, yes, we know this is an issue for the next 10 years. I don't like to see, where we admire a problem and then we talk about a problem, then we do a pilot, then we admire the problem some more. Let's identify the problem. Let's get a pilot. Let's scale it, figure out what works, then implement it and move out. And as we implement, appreciating more studies that talk about that implementation and what's working, what's not. And we continue to evolve and replicate that solution broadly across our programs and the rest of the programs. So I've talked way too long. I do want to thank AUSA, Shelley, the Military Family Research Institute at Purdue, Auburn University, and again, AUSA, really appreciate you hosting us here today. So when the family's strong, the military member is stronger. When that military member can deploy forward and not look over his or her back and know that their family is being taken care of, that's the commitment we have to keep here today. And we keep that by continuing to do the important work you're doing. So I truly appreciate your efforts in this space. Look forward to meeting every one of you. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Simmons. You said something that really is going to stick in my mind. I guess it would be the verbal equivalent of a musical earworm in a good way. And I think researchers, I'm going to speak for myself. I think I was trained to care very much about the future, but to think a lot in terms of my data about the past. Your observation, I think, is very timely. Our data, all by definition, are, coming from people who experienced things in the past. And it's very common in our articles and our papers to have a section at the end that talks about all of the things that ought to happen. But in truth, I think I feel much more comfortable in my chair than I would feel in yours. But you're challenging us. If we want our research to be truly actionable, we have to get better at thinking like you and providing you with ideas that can influence and support the families of the future as they deal with the challenges of the future. And that's a tall order, and many of us are not trained that way, I don't think. And of course, I train other researchers, and so that's my fault, I suppose. But it's a really great idea to have on the table as we open this day, because the conversations that are going to happen throughout the day can chew a little bit on that idea and think about, well, how could we make that work better? And I think one of the ways that it really can be supported is when we can have more conversations, because we have different areas of expertise, but just having conversations at the end doesn't always help us come up with the most actionable, durable solutions. And so I really welcome opportunities like we have today to have researchers and practitioners and policymakers in the room at the same time, trying to work together toward these outcomes that we all care so much about. I'd like to give everyone a little bit of background about the history and the purpose of the Thompson. It's not just an award, and that's even more true today than it has been in the past. In 2015, MFRI created an award to recognize scientific articles that combine exceptional rigor with important insights into military and veteran families. 2019, in this room, I think, we had the pleasure and the privilege of naming the award in honor of Barbara Thompson in recognition of her 30-plus years of service to military and veteran families and to her commitment to try to bring evidence and practice together. Now, as the award celebrates its 10th anniversary, we've launched a new chapter. We no longer refer to just the Thompson Award. Now it's the Thompson. Think Nobel, Pulitzer. We're inspired by the greats. The Thompson is a national initiative that recognizes and amplifies the most impactful research on military and veteran families. The goal of the Thompson is to honor excellence in research by also strengthening connections between researchers and practitioners to better support military members, veterans, and their families. The Thompson platform incorporates multiple elements. One of those is the Thompson list, which we issued for the first time this year. This is a curated selection of articles from the past year that stood out to reviewers on the committee for the Thompson Award for their quality, innovation, and practical relevance. Chosen from hundreds of peer-reviewed publications, the list represents the year's most impactful scholarship in military and veteran research. The featured papers for the award and the list are selected through a rigorous process. You cannot apply for your work to be considered for this award. Authors have no idea that their work is being considered. Instead, a panel of accomplished scholars examined more than 800 relevant articles published during the past year. Multiple rounds of review using standardized quantitative criteria yielded the finalists and the winning articles. All publications featured on the list are also considered for the award. This year, the list includes 11 articles. 5 of those articles are finalists, and you'll hear about them in a minute. But I'll mention the other 6, just so you know, and you have at your seat information about the effort. Articles on the Thompson list are the traumatic brain injury and relationship distress during military deployment and reunion. The first author of that article is Leanne Knoblich. Predicting soldier retention from Army spouse characteristics and attitudes Soldiering On with Spouse Support, led by Kara Sims. Love is Not All You Need, Understanding the Association Between Relationship Status and Relationship Dysfunction with Self-Directed Violence in Veterans, led by Danielle Weber. Enhancing Engagement in Parenting Programs, a comparative study of in-person, online, and telehealth formats, led by Kiyu Kai. What works better? 1-year outcomes of an effectiveness trial comparing online telehealth and group-based formats of military parenting programs, led by Abigail Gewirtz, and an exploration of potential pressures to engage in parenting accommodation of PTSD symptoms for military couples, led by Elizabeth Allen. Please join me in congratulating these authors. The Thompson Award is another element of the Thompson platform. The award honors excellence in research, as you know, the goal, as with the effort in general, is to elevate the visibility of research on these topics and the topics themselves, strengthen connections between researchers and practitioners, and increase the impact of rigorous evidence. I'm now going to introduce you to this year's finalists, and I invite Barbara to join me at the podium so we can welcome these finalists. As I call your name, please come forward and have certificates. So yes, as we call your name, please come forward, and Macy's gonna, you're not gonna take a photo, is that right? At this point, we're only gonna do it after. So you're gonna come up now, and then you're gonna come up again, and we'll take a photo then, but we'd like to give you a certificate. So the first finalist is titled Examining Strength at Home Couples to Prevent Intimate Partner Violence on a Military Installation, a randomized control trial, published in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, conducted by a team led by Dr. Casey. The next finalist is titled Gender Role Reversal, Civilian Husbands of U.S. Military Service Women as Tied Migrant Workers, published in the Journal of Family Relations. The first author in this study is Emily Dowling. Emily's parents are here today, and we're so pleased that they get to see their daughter be honored for her great work. That's just super. The third finalist is titled Parenting Profiles in Military Families, Intervention-Related Transitions and Relationships to Child Adjustment, published in Prevention Science. The first author in this study is Sun Kyung Lee. The next finalist is titled Replication and Extension of the Military Family Stress Model, the After Deployment Adaptive Parenting Tools Adapt for You study, published in Family Process. The lead author in this study is Bosco Hei Cheng. Welcome. Our last finalist is the paper titled The Role of Problem-Solving Appraisal and Support in the Relationship Between Stress Exposure and Post-Traumatic Stress Symptoms of Military Spouses and Service Member Partners, published in the journal Stress and Health. The first author in this study is Kate Sullivan. Yes. Congratulations to all of the finalists. Barbara's now going to announce the winner, but let me tell you a little bit about Barbara in case you don't know her. As I said, we renamed the award after her in 2019 to recognize her as one of the pioneers, really, in the military family research/policy space. She directed the Office of Military Family Readiness Policy and the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Military, Community, and Family Policy from 2006 to 2017. She was responsible for programs and policies that promote military families' well-being, readiness, and quality of life. Most notably, she did extensive work to strengthen the evidence base for military programs and bolster program evaluation efforts. So let me turn the podium over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm losing my voice, so this is going to be short and sweet. When we entered the meeting room today, I mentioned that in 2000, when I arrived from working at the Air Force for 18 years up to DOD, there was one study on military children that we used for justification. So it is just amazing. 25 years ago, I met Shelley. And from then on, research became an important piece on how we improve the quality of programs that we offer military families and the policies that govern those. And so it's really exciting that in 2025, we haven't stopped. It's grown exponentially. And I think the variety and the topics, it's just amazing to me to see what we're learning about military families. And I just want to thank all of you for your commitment to their well-being. It really is an honor to be here to share it with that. So the 2025 winning article is titled, Examining Strength at Home, Couples to Prevent Intimate Partner Violence on a Military Installation, a randomized controlled trial. The study was conducted by Casey Taft, Emily Rothman, Matthew Gallagher, Evelyn Hamilton, Anissa Garza, and Susanna Creech. I'd like to invite Casey to come to the podium and share his findings with us. What an amazing study. And the neat thing was you have something practical that we can use. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an incredible honor this is, and what an incredible event this is. I'm so happy to be here to see folks, who do this work. And this isn't really an area of research that often gets a lot of recognition. It's incredible to have an event really to kind of highlight the work that all these great researchers are doing. So thank you all again for the honor, and as well as just for having this event. I know a lot goes into it. Talk to many of you who contribute to it, so I know this is a huge undertaking. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is the Strength of Home program that really was the focus of the paper that won the award. Strength of Home is actually a suite of different programs. There's a program for those who engage in partner violence. There's now a parenting program for Strength at Home. But what I'm going to talk about today is our couples program. So the couples program was developed nearly 20 years ago through funding from the CDC, and it's continuously been funded through the Department of Defense since then. So I'm going to do kind of the 5 to 10 minute version of what's normally probably a 2-hour talk. So I'm going to start talking fast here. So just to give an overview of the program, this again was initially funded through the CDC, and more recently the Department of Defense has funded clinical trials for us to evaluate the program. Right now, DoD is funding us to implement the program. So we're now at the implementation phase of this, which is very exciting. It's an evidence-based program for preventing partner aggression in service members. So it's a program for military couples to enhance relationships and prevent conflict and prevent violence. So it's a fairly unique program in that it's prevention of partner violence, and there really isn't much out there that focuses on prevention that shows any kind of effectiveness. Currently, this program is being implemented across the entire VA healthcare system. We're at essentially all the VA VA hospitals around the country. And we've implemented across the military, not across the entire DoD, but we've done a fair amount of implementation work. The goals of the program are to enhance intimacy and closeness in military couples, to develop conflict resolution skills, and again, to prevent physical, psychological, and sexual partner aggression. It's not really intended for severe violence. It's really more prevention focused. If there's mutual aggression, lower level aggression, the program is appropriate for that. The programs for couples reporting relationship distress or concerns of partner aggression. These are groups. So these are groups of couples who all participate together. Closed groups, meaning they all begin and end together, 8 weekly 2-hour sessions. It used to be a 10-week program, but we shortened it because those on military installations told us 10 weeks was way too long. So we've done everything we can to make it kind of as impactful and as kind of as short and effective as possible. These are the phases of the program. Early on, there's a heavy focus on psychoeducation. We provide education on trauma, how trauma can impact relationships and families. We help each of the couples develop greater insight into their specific relationship difficulties, as well as some core themes that may underlie trauma reactions that can contribute to relationship problems, such as difficulties with trust, issues related to self-esteem, power and control issues, issues of guilt and shame, and how all of these core issues that may underlie trauma may impact relationships and ultimately contribute to conflict in relationships. Then in phase 2, we go over more conflict management strategies, helping couples understand how each of them learned to express their feelings, deal with anger, deal with conflict growing up. We do assertiveness training, trying to help couples to more appropriately set limits and boundaries with each other, express their feelings in more forthright and honest ways, timeouts to de-escalate conflict situations. And the last several sessions are focused on improving communication skills, active listening, emotional expression, avoiding traps that couples often fall into. So basic communication skills. And all of these skills are taught in an interactive way where we have couples practice this in the session and outside of the session with coaching from the providers. So as I mentioned, our first study was a randomized controlled trial funded through the Centers for Disease Control. The first study we did was in the VA healthcare system where I work in Boston at the National Center for PTSD, which we published this study in the same journal as the other study that I'll be talking about, which is the award-winning study. This was a study done in the VA with 69 couples. And what we wanted to do, we wanted to compare those who received Strength at Home versus those who received a different program that we called supportive prevention. And these were essentially supportive groups led by the couples themselves, where the couples would set the agenda, they would decide what they wanted to talk about. And these were actually very effective groups, by the way, when essentially they were support groups with couples, and they did a lot of processing of trauma. While we were doing this study, we were not sure that Strength at Home was going to be more effective than this other group that seemed very effective by itself. So we compared those who received Strength at Home versus supportive prevention. And you see the demographic characteristics here range in age from 24 to 59 years, 80% Caucasian, 3/4 were married and had children. And so this is looking at physical violence perpetration for the veteran, based on the reports from both the veteran and their partner. We use combined reports. So at time 1, there's no violence reported because this was strictly a prevention trial. So couples who had violence weren't included in the study, or veterans who had engaged in violence weren't included. So what you want to see is less of an increase over time in violence in the Strength at Home group. And that is what we find. So at time 2, you can see just about half the rate of physical violence in the Strength at Home group compared to supportive prevention, and the rates continue to be lower at each time point. So this suggests a preventive effect of Strength at Home in terms of physical violence that veterans engaged in. We also looked at their relationship partners' physical violence, and we also found greater reductions in physical violence in the partner in strength of home compared to treatment as usual. We looked at veteran psychological abuse and found similar reductions in psychological abuse, comparatively greater reductions in psychological abuse in strength at home compared to supportive prevention. And likewise, their partner's psychological abuse also decreased more over time in strength at home. This was just another measure of psychological abuse, greater reductions in strength at home for veterans as well as for partners. We published another follow-up study, and this was funded through another grant through the Department of Defense, where we looked at sexual aggression in this sample. We wanted to see if strength at home was also effective in reducing sexual aggression, because we found pretty high rates of sexual aggression in these couples. So by sexual aggression, it could be any form of sexual coercion. For example, 29 or 30% of veterans endorsed insisting on sex when their partner didn't want to. So we wanted to see, how does strength at home reduce sexual coercion in military couples? And what we found was a very similar pattern as what we found with other forms of abuse: stronger reduction in sexual coercion for those who receive strength at home compared to supportive prevention. Even though they were higher in the beginning at baseline, they showed stronger reductions. Their partners also showed greater reductions in sexual coercion. So then this all led to the next study, the study that we're talking about today. And this was another study funded through the Department of Defense to look at this program actually on a military installation, because that's ultimately the population this program was built for, because it's really for prevention. We want to work with couples as soon as possible following a deployment or even before a deployment. So we wanted to see, how does this look when we implement this program on an installation? So we did this study at Joint Base Lewis McChord. This is a larger study. 139 couples were enrolled. And again, they were randomized to receive strength at home or this supportive prevention. And you can see the demographic characteristics here. Almost all were married. This is looking at the service members' physical aggression. Now, for this study, we actually allowed folks to participate in the program even if they did have some physical aggression. So what we see here for service members, you see a clear linear reduction in physical aggression from pre-treatment to follow-up, strong reduction in strength at home, whereas those who were in supportive prevention, they actually showed a slight increase in aggression at post-treatment before it went down. So these results favor strength at home. Psychological abuse, stronger reductions in strength at home. More improved relationship satisfaction for those who receive strength at home compared to supportive prevention. Sexual aggression also went down more in strength at home. Again, we're seeing the pattern where it actually went up in the supportive condition, whereas it went down in strength at home. In this study, we also wanted to look at suicidality, because we know relationship conflict, relationship problems are a strong risk factor for suicidality. So we wanted to see, when folks improve their relationships, when they reduce their conflict behaviors in their relationship, does this also reduce suicidality? And that is what we found. This is a very hard thing to study. It's a very low base rate. But what we found is actually those who receive strength at home, their suicidality went to 0 by the time we went to 3-month follow-up. So none of the participants who did strength at home reported any suicidality by the 3-month follow-up. But again, it's a very difficult thing to study in, without having thousands of people, it's such a low base rate event. But these data at least suggest that strength at home was effective in reducing suicidality. How did I do on time there? Was that 10 minutes? This is our website. If anybody's interested in reading more about it, if you go to the resources section, we have PDFs of pretty much all of our studies if anybody wants to read any more about it. And you can also contact me through the contact link here for folks interested in being trained in the program, or if you want to learn more. So thank you very much.
For those of you who are participating online, what I just explained is that you will have time soon to ask questions of Dr. Taft and our other finalists. So if you have a question, please make a note. You're going to get your chance soon. It's wonderful to celebrate this work. And of course, this represents, what, 10, 15 years of work that you just presented in 10 minutes. It looks so tidy. But as someone who lives in that world, I know that it looks anything but most of the time. So thank you so much for sharing it with us so clearly and succinctly. We're now going to have a panel featuring our Spotlight on Research, and the panel will be moderated by our good partner, Mallory Lucier-Greer. Mallory is a professor of human development and family science at Auburn University. She has a clinical background as a marriage and family therapist and is an award-winning educator. Her research is focused on the well-being of military families, particularly examining how stressors impact these families and why stress manifests differently in some families compared to others. Dr. Lucier-Greer is the principal investigator and project director of Military Reach, a DoD-USDA partnership grant that is focused on translating military family research into practical and accessible tools and resources for policymakers and service providers. The purpose of Military Reach is to bridge the gap between military family research and practice and make research practical and accessible. They do this by producing research summaries with action-oriented implications for their target audiences, families, helping professionals, and those who work on behalf of military families. The REACH team critically evaluates and synthesizes military family research related to issues of family support, resilience, and readiness. They do the Thompson effort the great favor of doing the comprehensive literature research. So the reviewers on the committee can start with this spreadsheet of already compiled 800 articles as opposed to going through all the journals to find the 800 articles. So the reviewers, I think I can safely say, are very grateful for your partnership, as are we. I'd like to invite Mallory to the podium and this morning's panelists to the front table. Please come forward.
Oh, good morning. On behalf of Auburn University and Military Reach, it is such an honor to be here. As Shelley mentioned, our team is the one that generates that list of 700-800 articles. And, you know, as a true nerd, it's so fun to find them and to just acknowledge all the work that has been done across the field within academia and Veterans Affairs, you know, just the research that happens across the country. So it's particularly rewarding to be able to sit here with these 5 finalists and winners and really just piece together some of this information. What do we make of this? That as we are in this room, we all are working towards a common goal, but we're difference makers in different ways. Some of us love statistical modeling, and some of us do not, and that's okay. So as we have these conversations today, I want you to be writing down the questions that you have for the panelists. I'll start us off with a few, but we will begin with some brief introductions from the panelists. I don't have the papers up here, Shelley. So we'll have each person, they'll introduce their study. So they're going to give you about a 2-3 minute overview of their study, which in our world, it's really hard to summarize years of work and data analysis in a couple of minutes. So store away your questions. First up on our panelists, our first panelist is Bosco Cheng. He's a postdoc at Arizona State University Reach Institute. Dr. Cheng, could you give us a quick overview of your study?
Sure, thank you. I have to, okay. Testing. Okay. Can you all hear me? All right. So I'll try to give a quick overview and skip out all the the technical parts. But primarily for this study, we are actually want to is focusing more about the theoretical work, because the rationale of this study is when we were looking at how military deployments as a stressor that affect families, we find out there are not many models that specifically target at the military population. Mostly it's from the civilian population. So this is considered as an extension of my advisor's, Dr. Abigail Gilwell's work. She has empirically tested the military family stress model, which you can see the figures on the right. And this purpose of the study is to actually replicate and also to extend and to see if we can put the same model with a different sample, also a military sample, and then also see if this model can be both applied to both fathers and mothers within the military family. And in this case, we want to see if they're we are trying to see if the risk process, are they parallel? And this is a question that we want to ask. And the samples that we have about 200 fathers and about 200 mothers. And they are both included in the National Guard and Reserve, as well as the active duty service members' families. And the process that we would try to look into is we hypothesize military risk stressors that will affect marital adjustment, and then towards the effective parenting practices, and eventually it will has a adverse effect on the child adjustment. Can I go to the next slide? Thank you. And by skipping all the technical parts, because we actually spend so much on each of the variables I mentioned, we test so much on whether it's from observational data, multiple informants, and also we want to look into for each variable, we'll try to see if there are differences between fathers and mothers before we test whether the process are parallel. So this is the whole paper is all about that part, but one key conclusion that comes up from all this statistical modeling is we find out that if we account for the mean differences between fathers and mothers on the PTSD practices, on the PTSD symptoms and also of the parenting practices, the magnitude of the relationships is actually similar. But if we don't account for it, then we'll find differences. But overall, we find that the process are similar between fathers and mothers, and there's no gender differences that contribute to the understanding of family risk pathway, which is kind of surprise to us, because at first we thought mothers who are the stay-home, who are mostly the civilian spouses, they probably have stronger relationship with the child adjustment. But we don't find that way. And even with the fathers who are primarily as the 90% of them got deployed, we thought that they with the higher PTSD symptoms, they probably have a more stronger relationship with the marital and also the parenting practices. And it's not the case. And if we account for the mean differences, the relationship is actually, the magnitude is the same. So the implication is, despite the different role of the both genders, the similarity of risk process were found, and actually kind of brings to the one key finding is that actually is very important to look into both post-deployment adjustment through family perspective in terms of how they affect, and could not be missing either one when we want to influence on the intervention and kind of set the foundations for the theoretical piece. Yeah, I hope I'm still within 2 minutes.
Yeah. I hope all my students back at Auburn were listening about the importance of theory and applying that theory to test a really important model. There will be a quiz when I get back. Next is Emily Dowling, a licensed marriage and family therapist at Full Hearts Relational Therapy. Emily, could you give us a quick rundown of your study?
Of course. So my study, gender role reversal, you can click and we'll look for the next, yeah. So basically, what we really wanted to do was understand the essence of the experience of civilian men who were married to service women in the U.S. military, to understand how they experience their gender identity basically as tied migrant workers, which basically just means that their careers are dependent to some degree on their wife's careers, like where their wife gets sent as a result of her military service will impact what opportunities are available for them, which is very different than most family structures in which, even though, the society at large is changing, often men are the primary breadwinners of families. And it's very different from the vast majority of the military in which this family structure is a military serviceman married to civilian women. So next, please. So data was collected with semi-structured interviews with 22 civilian men who experienced at least one relocation due to their wife's service. And we developed themes looking at all of their interviews using descriptive phenomenological analysis to try to understand like what is the essence of this experience. Next slide, please. Hard to boil down research into as succinct as possible, right? But basically, the results or major themes that we discovered was were redefining masculinity, the minority experience, and non-traditional gender role as tied migrant workers. Participants described changes in their personal definitions of masculinity, and perceived societal shifts in marriage gender roles for both men and women with regards to breadwinning and parenting. And then for the minority experience, participants described how their identity as a male civilian spouse is a role reversal from the majority of civilian spouses who are women. So both the difficulty and the importance of connecting with male peers and a perceived lack of inclusivity in military events and resources were highlighted by participants in this theme. And then the third one is the non-traditional gender role as tied migrant workers. So in this, participants really described experiencing both tons of benefits in their position and in being family members of a servicewoman, and also challenges in their non-traditional role. So they explained factors that contributed to both the comfort and discomfort as tied migrant workers, including their personal expectations growing up to be the main breadwinner for their families and how they had to really adapt that in order to thrive in this role. Next. So clinical implications, which is my favorite part as a now practicing marriage and family therapist, challenges. So it's really important for anyone working with this population to be aware of the challenges that they may face, like including a sense of isolation. It's rare to find these civilian husbands, and so they're geographically isolated from each other in many cases. So that sense of isolation, the loss of identity in their career, if they've had to sort of do this whole start-stop career depending on where the military sends their family, unmet expectations they may have for themselves as financial providers. And so you look at all these challenges, be aware of them, and of course then assess for any potential impacts on their mental health. But not only to look at the challenges, right? To also look at the strengths and consider factors that actually may contribute to a really positive experience, like their ability to engage in role flexibility, how they might value teamwork and egalitarianism in their relationship. And what we found with a lot of these men was the ability to redefine what it means to provide and expand that into, okay, I'm not just responsible here. My role as a provider is not financial necessarily, but what do I provide to this family in other ways? And what we found is that emotional support, the vast majority of participants talked about how important it was to provide emotional support to their wife, and children if they had children too. And so we can look at the strengths that might be required or they might already be bringing to the table and use those to support them in progress towards their goals, or even look at them as potential areas of growth that might help them if they're struggling in this role. And as I mentioned before, emotional support was huge. And so I looked here, we looked at what specific modalities might be helpful for these couples, and emotionally focused therapy stood out as an ideal treatment modality. Basically, it really helps. It's an evidence-based practice that has been shown over and over again through research to help couples strengthen their bond with each other, become more effective in offering that emotional support to each other that the men in the study highlighted as being so important, and that hopefully will help them better face the unique challenges that that they experience in their role.
Emily, we had a chance before to talk about how powerful like words and phrases can be. When you think of this term like tied migrant worker, of course it can be applied to either spouse, husband or wife. And in this case, you really elevated those experiences of men. And yeah, it can be a really powerful descriptor. Thank you for that. Next is Sun Kyung Lee, an assistant research professor at Sanford Harmony Institute at Arizona State University. Dr. Lee, will you give us a quick overview of your study?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I would like to introduce my research, and it really started with reflecting my own parents, how they had different parenting styles. And I thought there must be different parenting styles within mothers and fathers within families. And if my parents were in the part of the parenting program, their takeaway would be different. So I really wanted to test that within military, post-deployed military families. And my findings were that there were 3 different groups appearing for both mothers and fathers. And we observed parents interacting with children, and then we measured about their problem-solving skills, involvement, encouragement, monitoring, and their harsh discipline. And it was interesting to see that they were showing very similar 3 characteristics of parenting styles. And we named it as the green is the high positive parenting skills, and the yellow is the moderate positive skills, and then the red was more about coercive parenting, which involved more harsh parenting. Next slide. And so it showed that in the ADAPT parenting program, which was aligning with what Bosco have shared with us today, that mothers who were in the moderate positive group have shown a lot of increase into more high positive parenting group. But then the fathers, it has been shown less significant improvement in previous studies. But then it showed here that it was not, if we see the father as a whole, it didn't really see their improvements. But then it showed that those fathers who were in the moderate parenting group were not moving to the coercive parenting when they were part of the parenting program. So it really showed that it was not showing in the numbers that it's preventing the fathers who were more likely to be post-deployed military to move towards more coercive parenting. And I also wanted to see how those transition from one parenting group to another impacted on their child outcomes. And it showed that mothers' growth were showing more related to lowering the externalizing behaviors. And then instead, and fathers, if they show better parenting skills after the program, it was more lowering the child internalizing problems. So my takeaway was really military families are not uniform. We need more tailored approach for each families and where their parenting skills are if we are providing a parenting program. And it showed that evidence programs are working and either improving and preventing. And each parent has unique skills and it can strengthen different parts of their children outcomes. So we need both parents to be part of the program.
Dr. Lee. Next is Dr. Kate Sullivan, an associate professor at the Silver School of Social Work at New York University. Dr. Sullivan, tell us a little bit about your study, please.
Thank you so much. So this study, for those of you who were here last year, is a continuation of the paper that I presented at this event a year ago. So overall, this project is interested in understanding how stress exposure in military parents is connected to their own mental health and ultimately to the mental health of their children. And in this particular paper, we were really interested in how the psychological resources, coping and support that spouses bring into the mix can support families in managing the stressors that they are exposed to. So we looked at this in a sample of about 3,300 military couples who had at least one child between the ages of 3 and 11. And we're able to do this because of a partnership with the Naval Health Research Center using Millennium Cohort Family Study data, which we heard a little bit about earlier today. So what we were interested in is considering how these resources that spouses bring into their family systems might buffer against the experiences of stressors that both military parents have. And in particular, we zeroed in on a set of stressors, including early exposure to maltreatment among both military parents and how this kind of broader array of stressors would impact mental health outcomes. You can go to the next slide, please. So we found a few things. First is an elevated exposure to all different kinds of stress among both military parents, and in particular, really elevated exposure to early experiences of adversity and maltreatment in particular among military parents. That was very pernicious, very impactful on their own mental health. And then relatedly, we were able to look at how these resources amongst spouses interrupted that transmission of stress to the mental health of military parents. And we saw a couple of different patterns. Spouses we were reporting on both their sense of support that they received from their communities and their own perceptions of their competence to solve problems. And interestingly, spouses who saw support in their communities, that was good for their mental health and their partner's mental health, regardless of their exposure to stress. So it had sort of a promotive effect on mental health versus their estimation of their own competence to solve problems operated in more like a buffering sense, where they were the higher they were in their perceived competence at solving problems, the less impactful their exposure to stress and their partner's exposure to stress was on their mental health. And I think one thing that's really meaningful to me, and one thing that we really are trying to think about how to manifest into the work that we're doing now, is that we saw these relationships operate across partners. So spouses' appraisal of their own competence to solve problems and their perceptions of the support they received from their communities was impactful at managing their own stress and also impactful at managing their partner's stress. So it had this sort of family-wide impact. And that piece, I think, is super important. So we're now thinking in the work that we're doing now about how to both to better screen for a wider array of stress exposures, not just exposures that are associated with military service, but other kinds of potentially stressful events, including early adversity. And also how to support the well-being of military spouses, and particularly to develop these kinds of psychological resources that are then meaningful, not just for their own well-being, but also for the well-being of their family systems. So much.
I love that too, and kind of like modeling real life. You know, you think about stressors in a lot of different ways. Well, what is it I bring from my own childhood? What are the stressors that I bring from military life and not military life? And then to say, okay, this combination of stressors is related to post-traumatic stress. And sometimes the story ends there, like, well, people with more stressors are going to have more post-traumatic stress. But then you come in with that, okay, so what? How do we think about this? Well, problem solving skills and like things that can be taught. So I really love that. And of course, you already know our award winner, Casey Taft, lead author of the winning article you just heard from. I guess I won't make you represent, 2 minutes of slides, but I do look forward to you part of this conversation too. So shall we jump in with a few questions? I saw some of you writing down notes that you're ready for. So I'll kick us off with a few questions, and then I'm excited for the folks in the room and online. Technology is amazing. Apparently the questions are just going to pop up in the screen in front of me. So we'll see how that goes. All right. So, as I think about like great research questions and great studies generally start when researchers know the research that's already there. What are the people around us doing? It also has like strong theoretical foundation. So tell me a little bit about what inspired your study. How do you know as a researcher, like what's the next question that we ask? What's the next study that we do? Anybody want to jump in there?
I could start. For me, it was just very obvious what I had to do. I think most of us in this field are, we want to make a difference, right? We want to do something that other people aren't doing. And I think at the time where I was really just starting my career was during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, after 9/11. And, there were all kinds of media reports about problems military families were having at that time. Reports of domestic violence. There were domestic homicides at Fort Bragg that were pretty heavily publicized. So for me, and I had been working in the domestic violence area with inner city populations, and then I did an internship at the VA, and I'd worked at the VA prior, and it just seemed obvious. Like, what do we need to do? We need to develop programs to prevent violence, to and strengthen families. And at that time, there was not any program that had been shown to be effective through a clinical trial for preventing or ending violence in a military or a veteran population. So I thought that I would start there. And since then, developing the Strength Home program for those who engage in violence, to prevent violence, and showing it to be effective with military populations. And now we've expanded it to civilian populations. So that's also a pretty big need. So I think, like, probably everybody on this panel, everybody in this room, we want to have maximum impact. And to me, that was kind of a no-brainer of where to go with things.
I can add as well. I'm a clinician by training. I'm a social worker by training, and I was in clinical practice for many years working with families who had experienced maltreatment. And so I saw in my clinical practice all the time how that exposure to adversity early on has so many knock-on effects into families. And so at the same time that work was happening in my clinical practice, there was research that was published both amongst service members and amongst their spouses to suggest that those experiences of maltreatment were more elevated amongst those groups. And so sort of for me, the work that I was doing as a clinician and this research that the field was generating kind of came together. And so the germ for this project that I'm talking about today and also talked about last year, it was really that idea that if we see elevated exposure to early adversity in this population, that must be meaningful, and there must be ways that that's impacting these whole families. And that's really where we started to try to investigate that question. But Casey, as you were talking about earlier, these are really low base rate events. So you need a lot of people in order to be able to look at those kinds of outcomes. So I've been super lucky to have this partnership with the Naval Health Research Center and to be able to have access to enough data that we can really look at those kinds of relationships.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Yes, I think I have something to jump into. I think for me, I'm more about research training, coming up in a research training, and then with both theory and quant method. So I feel like the way to ask next questions is about testing assumptions. Like from learning from theories, we learn that we have learning different theories. Each theory has assumptions. Same as the statistical method. We are just, for instance, when you try to test or with all the presenters, we test those the relationship between variables. We assume these variables apply to everyone, or we assume the theories will apply to everyone. Same as the interventions. That's how I see that. What if we put this assumption into test with now new methods coming out, with more data coming out that is able to we don't need to spend so much time on collecting data right now in the grace period where we can with the new method, we can apply the new method on the existing data set. And that give me, I can speak from my perspectives, give me the opportunity to let's put this assumption into test. Let's see if this theory, if these interventions apply to everyone, or does everyone benefit from the same thing? Do we see different thing? And then that's how I can see, that can be linked to questions maybe answering the question about who benefits more from which format, from which interventions, or maybe what risk pathway affects more. So I feel like that will be my overarching theme in terms of asking questions, research question, or even push me to research is by testing the assumptions that I don't even aware about when I'm learning the theories and all the models.
Some, kind of common themes that I hear too. It's like, I didn't create this in a vacuum. I created it in collaboration with partners, in my experience in working with families, testing assumptions and theory, and kind of being a connected researcher. Love that. All right, thinking a little bit about research methods. There's a lot of ways to conduct excellent research, and this panel really shows that. We have qualitative research, large data sets, intervention studies. So my question for the panel is, tell us a little bit about how your approach to these data, to collecting data, was best suited to answer the research question. And maybe, Emily, it'd be a great for you to kick us off in terms of really thinking about that qualitative lens.
Yeah, I mean, I felt a little guilty at first doing a qualitative study because collecting large data and really looking at it, getting more of a picture, maybe not with this population, but generally, it's like you can learn a lot from a large number of people. But for this one, it is such a small population of people anyway that qualitative felt like the way to go to really dive into what is their experience and take some time. I mean, I only interviewed 22 people, but spent a good, I think on average, maybe an hour or so with each person. And that gave me time, and much more with some who had a lot to say, which was great. But it really gave time to dive in and listen to them and hear what they had to say and get the story of it, which of course you need quantitative data to tell another part of the story too. But for this one particularly, it felt important to let them speak because they are an often invisible population in the military community.
Can you give us just a sense of what do 22 interviews, 30 minutes to an hour, like how many pages of data, how many words? Like, can you quantify that a little bit so the people in the room can really appreciate that?
Oh, I don't know that I could. I think I have a little remaining PTS from doing this research. It was conducted when I was a graduate student. And so the other two authors on the study were my thesis advisors at the time. So I conducted all these interviews and transcribed them. And so, yeah, it was a large amount of data to read through and really boil down into themes. I don't have a number on it. I've wiped that from my brain, but
I did not mean to reignite any
it's
stress.
okay. I know. I'm like, somebody help. No, it's okay. Sorry.
Anyone else want to weigh in on thinking about the methods and how they were really well suited to answer the research question at hand?
I can jump in. For my research, it was really important how we measured parenting skills. It was unique that this study was including not just self-report, but also observed parenting skills in like 10 minutes to 20 minutes given task. And then we had a lot of videos that we had to be coded and all the trainings that has to be done. It was a lot of human resource needed, time consuming. And that's how it was, how I decided to focus using the observation code so that it's less biased parenting measurement. But it also, I only used the observation, but then later on, I thought maybe there are some different perspectives coming from parents rating their own parenting is also somewhat meaningful. So I thought that is also very important pieces where even though observation is great, parents' self-report of self-rating of parenting is also important. And maybe also child perspective of their own parents is very important. And also because we talked about qualitative, my research quantitative method was latent profile analysis and how that moved across time. That also sort of include a qualitative part where we are relying on numbers, but then we have to see what's meaningful classes within those data set, what's meaningful profile, even though numbers say maybe 5 classes better than 3, we have to make those meaningful interpretation about that. So I think having those qualitative research based on, so that we can build on quantitative results on top of that.
I was glad you chimed in on this one because the methodology too, thinking of like a pre-test and then the intervention itself and then that post-test and thinking about those parenting profiles. And then if I'm remembering correctly, there was a time 3 that was really focusing on the child adjustment outcomes itself. So even just the length of time and the effort that goes into the intervention, much less the coding and the data. And yeah, it's pretty incredible. That does lead me to our next question and kind of thinking about the data and samples. So like, during data analysis, we often think about like advanced statistical modeling and big data sets and things like this. How do you remind yourself that these data points are individuals and families? Can you give us an example of some of the unique and meaningful characteristics of your own sample, perhaps?
I think I can start. Yeah, because primarily because I don't. I'm really like just sitting behind the computer screen, stare at it, like close your door. Spend the whole afternoon trying to deal with modelings. And try to just look at the numbers, hopefully, and then see which are the results significant. But I feel like to me is looking at the numbers sometimes can really help me to see there's something interesting. I will give an example here, which is not being featured in this paper, but I also there's a work that I'm doing right now is actually under review and revise and resubmit. Is actually looking at the subgroup of the sample that I just described. It's not the deployed fathers, not the civilian spouses. It's actually looking at the mothers who got deployed, and that means once they served, they got overseas deployed, but they come back and take up parenting role. And that's the part that hit me the most is because when I look at it, I find that, they both in the intervention group and the control group, their self-parental efficacy, meaning the one of the aspects of the self-confidence is pretty, they keep increasing, even though they have high levels of the PTSD symptoms, or even that they have experienced high levels of the military sexual trauma with this unique group. And that was the time I was like, I don't even need to see them. I can see, the first word that came into my mind is they are resilient, they are tough, and it's counterintuitive with what I've learned, because if you have more stresses, then suppose your self-efficacy will go down, but instead they go up, not only in the intervention, but in the control group. And that's kind of interesting in a way that as if I can wow, I can really pop up as very resilient. And I don't even meet any of them at all. It's just, to me, just numbers. But I guess it somehow kind of connects with the drive me to makes me more want to study it more. And by the way, hope that paper got accepted soon. But after all, still need to publish paper. But yeah, that's one of the just experience part. Yeah.
I could respond to that as well. For me, it's really important to be kind of connected to what we're doing. So I run my groups in the evenings as well. So to me, yeah, it's the research that we're doing. When we analyze the data, I'm very aware that these are actual people. For some of the studies, I actually run the treatment groups and the control groups. For this particular study, I wasn't the one who ran it, but it also in a clinical trial, especially in the area of violence and violence prevention, it also makes you keenly aware that there's a lot of things we can't control, right? And there's a lot of factors that are totally beyond our control. And you could do, a great study. You can deliver the most effective intervention, and you may work with a couple who's going to be violent no matter what you do, right? So when you're talking about violence, it could just be at one or two, a handful of people that can completely kind of tip the study in the other direction. So all while you're doing these studies, you don't necessarily know how it's going to come out at the end, because there is a random component to this. And some things, some people we can influence and they'll change. Other people may, engage in violence that it's completely out of our control. So I'm very aware of kind of the human nature of all of this. And for that reason, I feel like that's why we need bigger samples. That's why our programs really need to be effective, so much more effective than the alternative, that even if these random things do happen, you're still going to find, positive effects for what you're looking at.
Yeah, that's such an interesting approach, because, sometimes with maybe Millennium Cohort Family Study, these data have already been collected. Whereas in your case, Casey, that you were running these programs, you were seeing these people and their lives, and then also seeing the data. So even as researchers, our experience and kind of connections with the data can be really different. My next question is about findings. And Bhaskar, you kicked us off a little bit about this. Sometimes in research, we have unexpected findings that make you scratch your head a little bit and think, all right. So in the context of your findings, anyone on the panel, what are some important findings that emerged that were anticipated and expected, and perhaps maybe sharing with us some that were less anticipated and expected and did have to make you go back to theory or research to think about those findings?
So I think in this paper, and really a part of this paper is kind of the middle paper in a larger project, and one of the things that we really expected to see overall, and similar to the ADAPT studies that we've been talking about, we have both mothers and fathers in our sample. These are all heterosexual couples, though there are many of them, and we were really expecting to see, as we looked out to the next generation, and we have data in this project on young kids ages 3 to 11 as well, because we saw in the paper that I was just showing you all how impactful spouses were in this sort of bringing their resources to bear on the dynamics in these families. We were also expecting to see those findings play out for fathers as well. And when we actually looked out towards the kids in these families, we saw very little effect actually for the mental health of fathers on their children's outcomes, and moms and their well-being was dramatically more meaningful than the impact of fathers. You all can imagine that the vast majority of fathers in our sample were the service member, and the vast majority of mothers in our sample were civilians. But the moms' rates of mental health symptoms, their PTSD, their depression symptoms, were as high or higher than their service member partners. So these kind of other things that are happening in these families besides their military service really, really mattered. And the vehicle for that was often moms and moms' impact on children versus dads, who were overwhelmingly the service members and their impact on children. And so I think we really had to take a step back. This study, because it's a partnership with the Millennium Cohort team, we were really ready and prepared to talk about all of these military-related dynamics. And we had to take a big step back and think about, okay, but these are also families who experience all of the things that civilian families experience as well, and all the ways in which the kind of larger picture of what families experience matter, and maybe even eclipse their kind of identity as service members and military-connected families. That turned out to be really important and showed up in lots of different ways that we weren't initially expecting when we started this project.
So with our study, something that was interesting for me as a very inexperienced researcher, because again, it was in grad school and I didn't have a research background, the methodology that we chose was descriptive phenomenology, specifically because we wanted to to not be expecting very specific or anything really. It was more of asking very general questions and letting the participants really guide us into the areas that felt most important to them. So we used existing research, obviously, to guide, okay, where do we look? What might be relevant, what might be important based on the struggles and the positives that these people experience, but actually trying not to expect anything particular and taking many steps along the way to ensure that we weren't being biased by expecting something specific. And yes, just starting with really, really vague questions like, what is your experience of your masculinity as a civilian husband of a service member, and letting them talk and point us towards what might be really important to them. But one thing that I wasn't expecting in looking mostly at gender identity here and in family relationships and the couple relationship was a few of the men talked about how, and the vast majority of participants in this study were white men of European descent. So a few of them brought up that it was their first time really experiencing being a minority in a population. And so, yeah, that was unexpected for me because it wasn't really looking so much at ethnic background. And so it was interesting to hear how these men in this, maybe for the first time in their lives, really felt what it was like to be in a position where they weren't, in the majority group. So that was interesting.
I can jump in with my quick, unexpected findings. I was expecting to see very different profiles with mothers and fathers, but I was surprised to see they were very similar to each other. And when I also merged both fathers and mothers into one model, it also showed high father positive parenting was aligning with high mother positive parenting. So it was the moment where I kind of go back to the system theory, where family is running as a system that it doesn't really, it was not observing the parents parenting their children, were really showing if the one parent is doing well, it was really going together instead of like one doing better and one doing less well than the other. So that was very unexpected profiles that I found.
We have a question. Do we have a microphone for the room? Awesome. It is coming up front. And it's another plug for theory. I hope my students are watching. Right here in the front.
I don't even know if I'm supposed to participate because I'm the dumbest
participation,
person.
of course.
I was just curious, were the mothers and fathers interviewed together or separately? Because I can tell you, my husband did nothing, but he would ape anything that I said as what his parenting style would be. And I'm curious.
Yes, that's what we do.
Yeah, it was really reflection. I mean, my research question came from my own family, me observing my own parents. But the observation itself was doing both father and child only, mother and child only, and then as a whole family. And some of the measures were coming from as a whole, like monitoring was coming from the whole family interaction. And that was the only thing that was different from fathers and mothers parenting profiles, where mothers were more answering and showing more codes that was measured as more higher monitoring skills, and where fathers were more silent because the mothers were responding to all those codes. They were more less coded, but then it was also then was biased to say, oh, fathers are not monitoring their children. So it was not really answering all the questions that we wanted to do because it was a family as a whole interaction. But it would have been very interesting to see that separately as well.
I love the question too, because it speaks to this research literacy. Well, how were the data collected? Were both people in the room at the same time? Was it written down? Did you observe something that was happening? And I love that those questions circulate too, of like, all right, how did the research happen? Did you have a follow-up?
I just want to make sure that the children of the coercive parent, which is what I was, turned out okay, or
Well, if they were part of the program, it did show that their coercive parenting group went to a better parenting group. So, and then it turned out if mothers were getting better, they were reducing their externalizing. Fathers was more internalizing. So if both parents were going, if the system theory works, and if both parents get better or prevent of falling to coercive parenting, then that would have made all the child outcomes much better.
So using the programs and can maybe move from coercive to this moderate or high positive parenting. Yeah, okay, modifiable. Shelley, I think you had a question too.
I do. I want to ask a question that starts to approach this issue of the gap between research and practice. So I'm sure that you all did your research, you got your findings, you're interested in your discoveries having impact. But you're outside the fence or you're outside the gates, and you have to figure out how to make that journey, how to get across that gap. And I'm sure there are people on the other side of that gap who are very interested in the kinds of things that you do. And yet we know that gap is the Grand Canyon in some ways, right? It feels and is, it takes a long time and it's hard. So I just wanted to invite you to kind of share your reflections or your insights. Like, what do you find frustrating? What has given you hope? What do you wish could happen? How do we make sure that families benefit from worthwhile discoveries as quickly as possible?
I could start. So our study that the last study I presented on is actually a clinical trial / implementation study. but I didn't present the implementation results in that paper. That's in another paper that they keep making us revise it for some reason. But so yeah, I mean, I think nowadays, there's a whole science of implementation science that I'm becoming more familiar with. So while we were doing this clinical trial, we were also documenting what are the challenges to implement a program like this on a military installation, like a couples program that's really voluntary, where folks aren't getting mandated to do this program through FAP or anything. It really relies on couples coming in on their own, which, as you can imagine, is a tough sell, right? To have people do anything beyond what they're already having to do. And now we follow that up. So our current DoD grant that we have is strictly implementation. The whole study is how to implement the program, how to overcome barriers and challenges. And it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. Almost everything that we've tried hasn't really panned out. So we're kind of keep going to the next thing and trying more things. I think we might be on the right track now, but it's challenging. And for me, I realize I expect this is going to be a career-long struggle to try to implement the programs that we already know are effective, right? We already know this program works, and I have another program, we've done clinical trials, we show that it works, but to get everybody to use it is a whole other thing, right? And so I'm always out on the stump. I'm always kind of trying to promote it, speak to the right people. But it's a lifelong struggle, a lifelong challenge.
And I feel like scientists sharing those struggles, like, hey, these things did not work, is also important to share with, others who are maybe at very different locations, but also implementing programs. Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on Shelley's question?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. So the study that I presented today is even kind of like one step further back from the work that Casey's doing, and that we were just trying to understand the relationships between these variables before we could think about how we would intervene. And so we have, since these papers have been published, we have since taken that next step, and we're working on the intervention piece. But, I think one of the things that I reflect on is just how long that process is. It is very much a career-long endeavor to get from, here's a relationship that we want to address, developing something that we think might address that, or maybe kind of tweaking something that already exists, testing it, then thinking about how we implement it and what the barriers are to implementation. It's an extremely long time. So one of the things that I think has been a real development in the field of late, and my team is running a really similar study now where we're doing the testing and the implementation at the same time. And so bringing those things together, so we at least skip one of those steps and can sort of try to fast forward the process to get things out into the field more quickly. That feels really important, but it's a long time to get something that's well done and we know works out into the hands of people who can use it.
So you're saying science translation takes time and hard work, huh? Thinking about this application, we have a question from online viewer Danielle. Thanks for joining us, Danielle. It's specifically for you, Emily. It says, I appreciate the implications that you had for couples therapy. Do you see any implications for institutions to make programs or events for military spouses that are more inclusive of male partners when female partners are seen as the default?
Yeah, so I mean, the official military spouse programs that are put out by the DoD are they're not in name, and in name they're not made for wives, right? They're not made for female spouses. So in practice, one of the difficulties is capturing or making sure that the men do feel included. Before I get too far away from it, because I can ramble, can you repeat the question again?
Sure.
Like I just lost.
Implications for institutions? Do you see any implications for institutions to make programs, events for military spouses that are more inclusive to male partners? Even though you're exactly right, in name that they are for spouses and partners, but perhaps the feel is that they're more oriented towards women.
Yeah, and that was definitely the experience of the men in this study. I mean, they really felt like the resources that were available were not meant for them. And so as far as making programs more inclusive, I think it might be somewhat about helping the other members of the community understand that their experience isn't the only one that exists, even though they might be within the vast majority of people in the population. So I'm a military spouse myself, right? And I have maybe met a few male spouses in my day, but it's very rare. And so my experience with other women is that they mostly go, hey, ladies, hey, gals, like da-da-da, when they start conversations, even on, Facebook groups or whatever. Everyone's talking to the whole group as if it's this really homogenous, everyone's got the same experience. And so as far as programs becoming more inclusive, because the official programs already are supposed to be gender neutral, or in name they are, it might be more about engaging the community in ways that lets people understand more that, it's not a homogenous group. There's not just one experience. So maybe it's going through community.
I certainly have some questions about action, but I want to turn to all, I knew it. I knew the hands would go up. To some questions for our panel. They're ready.
Hi, thank you everybody for presenting today. One question that came up that challenged some of the thoughts in my head is many of the factors that you're looking at, spousal abuse, gender identity, PTSD, are really intransigent in people. I had one psychologist who said you're fully baked by the time you're 18, but yet, even though these things are hard to change, as you're well aware, what I'm seeing in most of the papers today is that there are people who are capable of changing, and many times from your charts retaining the things that they changed, even though these things are very hard to address. And that was surprising. Could you speak to that of, where do you think we went right in providing, and these are actually, and they were changed through some fairly short programs, 8 weeks, I believe, for one, and you actually saw solid results that were retained. What do you think happened, and why is this challenging? What we think about as people being difficult to change?
I guess I could start it off. So in the area of partner violence, that's one reason why we wanted to develop a prevention program, right? Is because once these patterns develop, it's harder to change once abusive patterns develop. So we wanted to reach folks as soon as possible after a deployment or before a deployment, before some of these patterns develop that ultimately lead to physical violence. But I also do working with offenders. After I leave here tonight, I'm going to do 2 groups in the hotel, right? So I do this, So I do this regularly, and I think there's this view that folks who engage in violence are unable to change. I think in the larger field, and especially court-ordered people or people who are FAP-ordered or mandated, there's a view that people are unable to change, but that really hasn't been my experience. I think it's largely because the programs that historically have been used in the area of violence have not been trauma-informed, they've not been very motivational, they've been shame-based and confrontational, and they just historically haven't worked very well. And so what I see in my program, my other program for, quote unquote offenders, those who engage in the violence, it's only 12 weeks long. And in other places, in some states, they require these kind of programs be 52 weeks long because they don't work very well. So I think a lot of these problems that people think, are intransigent, people can't change. It's because maybe we've been not taking the right approaches, at least in the area of violence prevention.
Just want to weigh in on that about change, especially in adulthood and the possibility of changing behaviors.
I can talk a little bit about change for the ADAPT program. It's a 14-week program for 2 hours for each session. And we do encourage the parents to practice their parenting skills. What they learned this week, to practice at least once or more, recommended until the next week. And then we do a follow-up, and we do a mid-session call to see what are their challenges, barriers, so that they do at least one practice. But then it has been really, really challenging for us to make them really practice at home, so that if they do more practice, it will become their own skill set. But because even though we do a midterm, mid-session follow-up calls, they weren't really, because they are very busy parents, they weren't able to really practice a lot as they also wanted to. So there are a lot of new research coming up, like how can we use apps to remind them to practice, and how can we use other technologies to really support them to practice at home so that they can bring more faster change instead of just learning in the session. So I think that's more coming up to see how we can use other tools to support that system for change.
Love that. We can't assume that like information is going to automatically translate into actions and behaviors, and there has to be some attention to, all right, what did you do after you left this session? That's a great question. I saw some hands in the back, and I welcome our online community to also put in questions that you have.
So my question is kind of a follow-up to Shelley's, and that's where would you go outside the research community to inform people who can take action on your research? And what help might you need getting to those resources? So you can't just talk to the research community. Where would you like to go? Who would you like to talk with? Who you think would help generate impact?
I don't want to talk too much here, but that question really resonates with me. And honestly, I will talk to anybody, anywhere. Okay, I will. Yeah, I will. So, like, for example, I met with folks at the Pentagon, to tell them about the program. One of the things we've learned is you need leadership support to implement anything, right? And so that's something you really do need. And sometimes it's a challenge, right? We implement these programs on military installations, and to talk to the folks in charge is not always an easy thing. I testified in front of Congress about this. I meet with the FAP managers. I try to attend their meetings. I'm constantly giving talks. I'm constantly on the stump trying to tell people about this and trying to work up the chain of command to talk to the decision makers as much as I possibly can, all while I'm doing the research at the same time, because if you don't have the research, nobody's going to really listen to you, right? So we have to show that what we're doing is working, and at the same time trying to talk to the people who can actually make it happen. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, yeah, I mean, working in the VA, I don't know that working in the VA has really gotten me, some of these meetings.
Try being at a university.
Might not have. But yeah, I mean, I would say, and I'm sure, folks on this panel do this, is just be persistent, right? Like just, I feel like a big part of what I do is almost like sales, right? Where I'm going and I'm on the stump, I try to educate people, and you never know you don't know I will say yes to any opportunity to speak in front of a group. One of the studies that I presented on it was I think it may have been the one I even presented on here, that came from attending a FAP managers meeting. And I was just sitting across the table from somebody during lunch, and I had no idea who this person was. They were wearing, their regular uniform. And as it turned out, this person was really able to make things really happen, and that's really, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but that really helped really set the stage for us to get one of the big grants to really show the program be effective. So I guess my advice to somebody just starting out is have a vision, go forward with it, have an end goal in mind, and it's a marathon, not a sprint, and talk to whoever you can to get it out there.
I think that's such an important question about how do you bridge these gaps that sometimes feel like Grand Canyons is really hard work. We have a question from our online viewer, Allison. I think I might know her. Hey, Allison. Aside from peer-reviewed journals, how do you approach disseminating research to enact meaningful change? As researchers, that's kind of our go-to. we published this study. But what channels or platforms do you recommend to other scholars to make sure their work reaches the right audiences, like practitioners and policymakers?
I can start. I think, this project, because I've been lucky to have a collaboration with folks who have an audience amongst folks who are on the ground working with this population, that has been a really helpful vehicle to reach folks. And NHRC, the Naval Health Research Center, does a lot similar to the work that REACH does to summarize and push out the research that uses their data out to practitioners. But I think another thing that I have recently really started to appreciate more, and this goes back to the last question as well, which is, I think it's super important to get the work that I do and my team does and the work that all of us are doing up here into the hands of decision makers, of policymakers. I also think it's really important to get it into the hands of frontline providers. One of the studies that I'm working on right now, which is a partnership with the Cohen Veterans Network, and my colleague Dave Link is out here in the audience, and he and I were recently on a trip across Texas to meet the frontline providers that are delivering the intervention that we're working on, that grew directly out of the research that I was talking about earlier. And what we learned on that trip was that the leadership was bought in, and they had kind of embraced what we were trying to do, and it took so much more work to get the frontline providers to also come on board with what we were trying to implement, and there was the chasm between me as a researcher and this organization, and then there was yet another chasm that we really are still working to get over between the leadership, the decision makers, the policy makers, and then the frontline providers who actually implement that out in the field. It's a lot of work to learn a new intervention, to implement a new skill. And folks who have been doing this work a long time, it's really tempting to just want to keep doing the thing that you're doing, right? So really trying to help folks see the value of what we're contributing and have that be attractive enough that they can get over the inertia of wanting to rest on what they've already learned and what they have always done. That has been an eye-opening thing for me, that I think it's really important to be able to speak at multiple levels to get the information out and to really have it translate to the people who we want to impact.
So I hear you saying we have to leave our offices sometimes, huh? And to speak in a language that, we're often trained as scientists. We speak in very precise language. It depends on this context and this thing, to be able to, all right, well, how do I have these conversations? I saw one question. Yeah, in the back, if you could use the microphone for us, please.
Hi, I'm Meg Cabot. I'm here with Psych Armor today. So my question is more of a philosophical one. And Kate, you referenced this. First of all, thrilled that there's a social worker on the panel, as a proud social worker myself. But sort of this notion that, veterans and service members and their families are people too. And sort of the, should there be more outside of this kind of amazing work that you all are doing in organizations where there's research that's being done, say, in, just violence prevention or parenting skills, that somehow has a slice of that's about military families instead of really focusing in on military families? Just sort of curious about your thoughts about that and if that's things that are going on where you're working as well.
I can start because I am very passionate about exactly that idea. So most of my work has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, not by the Department of Defense or by the VA. So from the beginning of my career, I have kind of always had to talk in that language, that these are families that experience a set of stressors and have a set of strengths, some of which are related to their military service and some of which aren't. And that kind of intersection of these things that have happened just because their families living their lives like we all are, and then this added kind of unique experience of being a part of military service, that intersection is really meaningful and something that we can draw lessons, we can extrapolate lessons from that are really relevant to all families. And oftentimes, and what I have been amazed by as I have tried to speak that language is that much of what has resonated about the work that I have done thus far has really been just about families. It hasn't been as much about military service. And I think that those connections, I think, are really important to getting to finding the broader reach that we've been talking about. That when I talk to funders at the NIH, I have to talk about why is this important to all families, right? The NIH isn't concerned about one little constituent; they're concerned about the population and our health as a whole. So being able to kind of learn lessons from this population that translate to the general population, I think, is a really important spin and something that gives us a platform to, as you were saying at the beginning of your talk, Casey, that oftentimes this kind of work isn't recognized because it's perceived as very niche or something that's really unique. And I actually think the opposite is true, that these are families that experience lots of challenges that we can all relate to.
I can add for the parenting program. It started with post-deployed military families, and then it was effective that we have the civilian version, and it has been developed for Spanish-speaking families. And I also try to deliver this to Asian families, and I think we have the other versions like online and telehealth so that we can more generalize the families that needs parenting programs. But when because I'm only limited to delivering it to Asian families, it was the highest challenge for me was getting the fathers involved together with mothers. Even though the childs were taken care of, the dads weren't really showing that much of involvement, and which I expected, but then it was higher barrier than I expected. So those were the things where it was really challenging, and 14 weeks were a little bit challenging for the general families as well. So I think we do have some more shortened version of 10 weeks, but then because it's an evidence-based research, I think it goes back to the gap of research and practice. We want to deliver it, let's say if we translate it, we want to test it to Spanish-speaking families to see if it works as it was working for the military families. And then as research really takes time, we don't also want to be effective in time and the rigorousness of the research. That is also another challenge. And then my research was really advocating that we need to tailor these programs for those families. If that is available, then it's easier to tailor for more other families who are not military families. But when it again coming to research and practice, the evidence-based programs are really saying following these manuals and being feasible to do that is showing this efficacy. But if something changed with it, there is a possibility of it might not work. And so I think it really comes to when it comes to the practitioner, they want to be more flexible in some of the sessions and curriculums. Then it also go out of the boundary of what's evidence-based. So I think that balance of how much do we need to tailor and how much we need to keep the research-focused evidence so that we can have both of that's generalizable, it's not burden for the practitioners, but then it's also supported by research. That's I think maybe other career lines needed, not. Yes. It will not end from me.
We have about 1 minute left. So I do want to offer the panel. Do you have any final remarks that you're thinking, I'm in front of a room of difference makers? And if I got to talk about, speak to practitioners or policymakers or other researchers, is there a final note that you'd like to leave us on? No pressure.
I don't necessarily have a final note, but I could give a brief answer to the last question I was going to say. That the questioner asked about violence field, and my experience in the violence field has been actually fairly interesting in that early on doing trauma-informed work, I would have only been able to do that with the military population. Back when I started doing domestic violence work 25 years ago or longer, it would be very controversial to do trauma-informed intervention with perpetrators of domestic violence. They would consider that to be coddling the population, treating it like a psychological problem as opposed to a power and control kind of issue. So my trajectory has been interesting in that I started doing this work with veterans, developing programs that have been shown to be effective with veterans and service members. And then once we showed that the programs were effective, then we expanded to civilians. And now we have 3 clinical trials going on with civilians, large implementation kind of projects. But I never would have been able to just start with civilians, only veterans, because there is an acknowledgement that veterans and service members experience trauma that can impact anger and violence and that sort of thing. And now the manuals that we use in our programs are exactly the same for veterans and civilians, because the processes, trauma works in the same way, whether we're talking about a veteran, a service member, or a civilian. Their trauma impacts them and their relationships in very similar kind of ways.
I would ask maybe, or say that, while it is important to look at military affiliated families and consider the stressors that apply generally or may apply to everybody, as unique as they can be to the population, to not view this group as homogenous, because if you look closer, there are going to be so many unique experiences within that huge group that maybe put them at risk for some challenges to be experienced in more extreme ways. Or maybe they have strengths that we can take and learn from and apply to the challenges that everybody faces. So I would just say, don't look at this population and think, okay, yeah, military families or military spouses or service members, and go, oh, right, because of this thing that they have in common, they have everything in common. There's a lot of unique experiences that are out there.
I love that as a closing note for the panel. Would you please give them a hand?
Thank you, Mallory, and thank you all of our panelists. Additional information about all of these studies can be found in the Thompson Brief document, which you'll find at your seat at the table. The studies can also be explored in depth on the MFRI website by visiting mfri.purdue.edu/Thompson. Our great colleagues at Military Reach also have produced summaries of each of these studies called trip reports, and they are available at the Military Reach website. So we have trip reports, which are good for people who want to spend 5 to 10 minutes reading about each study. We have the brief, if you're willing to spend 5 minutes reading about all the studies. And I'm very happy to report that the journals where most of these articles were published have agreed to put them in front of their paywall for the next 3 months. So those of you who would like to read the entire study are able to do that. So we really want to express our appreciation to the Archives of Suicide Research, Children and Youth Services Review, Family Process, Family Relations, Military Psychology, Prevention Science, and Stress and Health. I also have been meaning all morning to just share an observation with you. You might have noticed that we have 2 panelists up front today who are from the ADAPT project, which is led by Abby Gewertz. There are other papers on the Thompson list, and so Abby has really made enormous contributions, and I think has cornered the market on multiple recognitions and nominations. So I just want to express appreciation for her work and the work of the scholars that she has been nurturing, which is also a very important and also time-consuming responsibility. We have a special guest today that we don't usually have, who I'm very happy to welcome to the podium. Before we begin, he's going to give us some greetings. Dr. Stephen Erath is the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies at the College of Human Sciences at Auburn University. He holds a master's and PhD in clinical psychology, both from the Pennsylvania State University, right university, wrong major. His research interests include physiological and coping responses to peer and family stress, social difficulties in childhood and adolescence, and parent-child and peer relations. So he obviously shares interests with many of us. Please come to the podium, Dr. Erath, and we are happy to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me to the Thompson Forum. So we at Auburn University are grateful for our partnerships with the Office of Military, Community, and Family Policy and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture through projects like Military Reach and OneOp that aim to strengthen military family readiness. We value our connection with Purdue University and the Military Family Research Institute, and I'm delighted to join you today for the Thompson Forum. Your efforts to integrate research, practice, and policy are important and admirable. The aims of the Thompson Forum are aligned with the mission of Auburn University and land-grant universities like Auburn. Our mission is to educate students, conduct research, and share knowledge with the broader community through outreach. We recently developed a 10-year strategic plan. Two of the overarching goals are to conduct impactful research and to pursue catalytic engagement with the community. At Auburn, we aspire to integrate research and outreach or practice, such as through the work of Military Reach, which makes research discoveries accessible to practitioners and families. But it's challenging to integrate research and practice. Research and practice are often parallel, but separate missions with limited intersections. Jack Shonkoff has written about the connection or disconnection between science, practice, and policy. Scientists, he says, construct theories and test hypotheses. They are trained to acknowledge limitations of data and emphasize what remains unknown. Practitioners respond to concrete human needs and must make decisions in the face of inadequate information. They often rely on clinical judgment or professional experience. Policymakers mobilize information to support an agenda. They need compelling narratives, not just science. So integration of research and practice doesn't necessarily happen naturally or easily. I plan to be here in DC before Mallory invited me to the Thompson event because last night the Auburn University College of Human Sciences celebrated the International Quality of Life Awards. This is an event in which we celebrate individuals or groups who have made extraordinary contributions to quality of life. We hold this event in other cities, often in New York, to share what we do at Auburn beyond Auburn with our alumni, colleagues, and friends all over the country. We chose DC this year in part to communicate our goals and accomplishments with policy makers and people connected with policy. One of this year's Quality of Life honorees is Dr. Jan Davis, an Auburn graduate and former NASA astronaut. Coincidentally, Dr. Davis played a significant role in the connection between science and practice within NASA. Among many other accomplishments, she was the lead engineer for the redesign of O-rings that sealed rocket boosters to the external tanks of space shuttles after O-ring failures led to the tragic explosion of the Challenger shuttle in 1986. Dr. Davis and her colleagues identified a problem through practice and conducted research on that problem to improve future practice. But even prior to the Challenger disaster, there was evidence that the O-rings might malfunction in the cold weather in which the Challenger was launched. This evidence might have prevented the Challenger explosion had it been effectively translated to practice. But the communication between evidence or science and practice and policy broke down with catastrophic consequences. And of course, the breakdown in communication between science, practice, and policy happens in our fields too. I know that through my own work, for example, I know that evidence about the ineffectiveness of leading school-based substance abuse prevention approaches existed for many years before evidence-based programs were implemented more broadly. Even closer to my area of research, much of what we know about why bullying occurs and how to prevent bullying is often not reflected in practice and policy in schools. I'm sure there are examples of successes and failures in military family research too. The integration of research and practice doesn't happen easily. It is easier for researchers to conduct studies without fully accounting for the complexities and complications of real-world conditions in their studies. It's easier for practitioners to deliver programs and interventions without the specifications and adaptations to exactly what research suggests is most effective. And it is easier for policymakers to deliver a compelling message without addressing all the qualifications of research or the challenges of practice. But these parallel but separate approaches for research and practice increase the chances that we will fail to prevent negative outcomes and fail to promote positive outcomes. And this is why efforts to improve the integration of research, practice, and policy, like the Thompson Forum, are so important. Translation between research and practice doesn't happen just because we want it or just because we hope for it. We need to make it happen. Bringing together researchers, practitioners, and policymakers, like you've done today, is a model that we should emulate throughout the field. Certainly, military and veteran families deserve science informed by practice and practice informed by science. I'm sorry that I couldn't attend the research presentations this morning, but Mallory shared the articles with me. Congratulations on your excellent and important work, and I'm eager to hear from the community practitioners this afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and for those kind remarks. So this morning, the spotlight was on research. And you had researchers here at the front of the room, and you were learning about their studies, their insights, and their frustrations. And we ended the morning talking about the chasm that exists between research and practice. That chasm is the norm more often than it's the exception, unfortunately. And those of us in this room and the people who are online, we find ourselves sometimes on either side of that chasm, sort of looking at each other and trying to figure out how to close the gap. As you'll hear this afternoon, some people have one foot on either side and are very well positioned to educate us. Dr. Erath's remarks remind me that this chasm is not just a matter of inconvenience or annoyance. It actually can be life-altering and life-threatening when crucial information doesn't reach people who are in a position to act on its basis. It's highly consequential, even in fields that the immediate connection to life and death may not seem so obvious, but certainly anyone who works with stress and trauma and suicide knows that these things are life-threatening. This afternoon, we turn the spotlight onto practice. And now those of you who are at the front of the room this morning get to be out there learning in the afternoon. And this positioning is both intentional and hopefully consequential, because in my training as a researcher, sometimes it seemed as though my knowledge as a, quote, scientist was somehow better or more rigorous or more important than the knowledge that a frontline professional or practitioner might have. And there are circumstances where maybe science-based knowledge is something that should be privileged, but it's by no means the only source of knowledge. And I think as a researcher, I have benefited from, not that I've had to, I was eager to do it, but I have benefited so much from learning from the expertise of people who are out there every day trying to do good work on the basis of science or clinical experience or other things, but they are the people who are really trying to make the frontline difference. And I tried to model, not always successfully, but I tell other researchers, we have to learn with humility from people who know how to do things that we don't know how to do in environments that we don't spend our time in. And so the spotlight on practice provides an opportunity for all of us here in this room and our virtual audience to learn with humility from people who have expertise that we don't have. And by looking at each other across the chasm of this research practice gap, perhaps we can find ways to throw each other lifelines or throw each other connections that will help us knit together passages across the chasm and help us help each other in our work, because we all have relevant and valuable knowledge. And that is really what the essence of the Thompson is really trying to find ways to do that. And so I'm very grateful this afternoon to have with us such a great panel. And I'm even more grateful than you know, because 2 hours ago, only 2 of the people that you see up here were scheduled to be on this panel. But we had travel snafus today, and so people that we thought would be at the front of the room aren't at the front of the room. And you're going to be glad, because you're going to learn insights that you wouldn't have otherwise learned. You would have learned different things, but you're going to learn good stuff today. So I'm really grateful to all of the panelists, and I'll just go down the row. I'm not going to I'm going to ask you each to talk about kind of your work and your stance. So we start with Kathy Roth-Duquet, who leads Blue Star Families, and Kathy and I met a very long time ago, right when you got started, I think, and she kindly invited me to attend the White Oak meetings, retreats, when they were in person, and I was the first university person to get invited, and so glad to go. I felt so special. So thank you so much for being with us today, Kathy. And then Dr. Katie O'Neill. Katie helps to lead Military Reach, and Katie is at the University of Georgia. But both Katie and Kathy really live on both sides of the chasm, because Katie is working on a large program evaluation project and has also done research about closing connections between practice and research. So she's got valuable insights to share with us today. And then we come to Shannon Razadin from the Military Family Advisory Network. And you may be aware that MFAN's annual survey is in the field. And so Shannon also really has one foot on either side of the chasm and will have interesting things to say to us. And last but not least, of course, we have Meg Cabot, who I have known in several roles over recent years. You're very experienced, but is here today representing PsychArmor. So we're very happy that you all are here. And so I'm going to begin by just asking you to say a little bit about the vantage point that you have when you think about this research practice gap, and kind of how you spend your days, and how, where that puts you in thinking about this gap. So Kathy, would you be willing to start? Oh yeah, you got to.
Oh, how's that? There we go. Shelley, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for being one of the true OGs of White Oak and helping to shape what that whole body is. It's a cross-sector collaborative that tries to help the practitioners in the military and veteran serving organizations in the government be more data-driven and evidence-based. And really, Shelley was so instrumental in shaping the whole vision of that effort, which has become so influential over the years. So thank you.
I workshopped one of our last book. I workshopped at White Oak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if Joyce is still here, but she was another. Yeah, there she was. Joyce and Barbara, more OGs. So we should have a little reunion afterwards. But so I have a cross-sector background. Before starting and running Blue Star Families, I was in government. I was in a venture capital fund. I'm a lawyer. I was in politics, the foundation world. And so I was also a military spouse who moved 9 times in 16 years, whose husband deployed to combat 4 times, whose daughter went to 10 different schools by 10th grade, who experienced how hard military life was and saw my neighbors experience how hard it was. And I wanted to make a difference, but I also didn't want to waste my time. So it was really important to me that the work we do be evidence-based and data-driven, and we evaluate whether it made any difference or not because I wanted to impress anybody, but because I had other things to do if it wasn't going to make a difference. And I do think that's very important, because I think everyone who does this work is very well-meaning, but we have an internal motivation to get it right. And so Blue Star Families is the largest nonprofit now that supports military and veteran families. We grew from a grassroots organization. Recently, we surpassed 400,000 members, all of whom are organic. They joined themselves. We didn't acquire any lists or names. We have 13 chapters and growing to 24. So we really focus on the experience of people in the communities where they live and keeping track of them over time, creating trust and relationships so that we can bring the experiences that change their lives. And while we use evidence and research, it's not the point of what we do. It's the means to the end of what we do. And so I think that's the relationship difference.
Yes. Okay. That was so great to hear. Let me just say that, like, I have worked with Blue Star Families in several different capacities, but yeah, I don't think I'd heard all of that history. So thanks for sharing that. It's fun to hear people's stories. My name is Catherine O'Neill, associate professor at the University of Georgia. I realize professor, and some people are like, oh, why'd they invite their researcher back up there? But I will talk about different hats today. So my background, I was first trained as a marriage and family therapist, and I really thought I was going to work, in the trenches doing therapy with people to make a difference. And I quickly realized that while I have this passion for helping people, that probably the therapy room was not where I was meant to be. And so I kind of joke it was a good thing I was good at research and could go on and get a PhD. But even then I quickly was like, okay, I want to do the so what piece of like, so what? Like, how do we make research like matter and really make a difference? And so in what does that look like in a day-to-day role, right? Shelley, that was your question. So one of our projects is military reach. And that's really cool because we were seeing all these studies come out about military families, but 30 pages and stats jargon, and like, who has time, in the real world to read that? And so to get to really break that down and be like, okay, here are the main points, but let's go ahead and put on the hat of what can policymakers do with this? What can, helping professionals do with this to at least get the ball rolling on some ideas, knowing that we don't have the wealth of expertise and depth necessarily that those individuals do, has been a really fun part of what we do. We also get to work directly with the Office of Military, Community, and Family Policy. So if there's a new, they're starting to, foresee, okay, there are going to be changes in policies around spouse employment. We get to deep dive in the literature and say, like, what has the research shown us about that topic? And I really love the problem solving there. Maybe some of you who are researchers out there, like, there may not be a specific study that has looked, that gives us the answer, but how do we think creatively about what has been done and apply that and think through that? So it's a creative process of like really pushing ourselves in the boundaries of research that others are doing to translate that work and give it more handles, so to speak. In my role in program evaluation, since 2018, my colleagues and I have led the financial readiness program evaluations for the Department of the Air Force. And up until that time, I think like Bosco said this morning, like, looking at numbers, right? That was what my job was mostly before then. Like, we go out into the field to 3 to 5 bases a year and get to interview facilitators who give the program, get to interview commanders who oversee the program, get to interview trainees, service members who are receiving the program, spouses to find out what, challenges they're facing. It has brought it to life in such a new way for me as a researcher. Like, I truly have a passion as a researcher that I don't think I could have had without that experience of going out and meeting people. And, seeing it at each base, things look a little different. There are some similarities. There are some differences. I think that has been instrumental for bridging that gap. We also work with policymakers on that project. So, we go to the Pentagon and we brief our POC's leadership. We hear the questions that they're asking. We get to try and we literally just in real time think through, how do we make these programs better at a policy level and at a practice level? It's a challenge. Like, it's not a perfect science. I think it's hard And if we wanted a job that we could leave at the end of the day and be like, yeah, like work is finished, I don't know that we have that. But I really enjoyed the challenge of kind of continuing to try and make things better. And yeah, so I really feel like we're in that gap with the policymakers. We work with amazing people who want to use research, and I really love that. I love that in the military family space, there are so many people that are interested in how do we utilize research, and it's just kind of finding that common language to be able to do that, I think.
Thank you, Katie.
That's great. So I'm Shannon Razadin. I'm with Military Family Advisory Network. We go by MFAN for short because Military Family Advisory Network is a mouthful. But thank you so much for having me here today, and it's wonderful to be with you all. I flew in from Rhode Island this morning. My life is, I'm a military spouse. My husband retired from the Navy about 2 years ago. So on the other side of the adventure, which is still very much an adventure, I'm a mom of a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. So I reversed their age, 7 and 9. That's why I don't do the research, guys. So we're very much an elf on the shelf mode right now for their parents in there. We're one of those suckers. But MFAN, we've been around for 13 years, and similar to Blue Star, our life's about making life better for military family. And I say our life because so many people that work for MFAN have lived this life as well, and so it's personal. We do a significant amount of research. Our survey is currently in the field, as was mentioned, thank you. And that really helps us dig deep to understand if the things that we are hearing from the military families that we serve are anecdotes, or if there's true scientific data to back what we are hearing from military families. And so it's blending the combination of authentic and the data that for us as an organization has really, in a lot of cases, been our secret sauce. And I really appreciate the conversation earlier this morning because it's not just about research for research. It's about research for action. It's about research for change. And for us, one of the things that we've been able to do with it is research with agile response. And so we have been able to act quite quickly in some cases on the things that we have learned from the research. And so an example of that is some of the work that we've done around food insecurity, as well as a program we just stood up very quickly around the government shutdown. We can get more into that in a few minutes, but one thing that's interesting about us, and I have to give Gabby Lesperance, Dr. Gabby Lesperance, a shout out. I think that she is watching right now. She leads our research work. And so we do everything in-house, start to finish, and that is everything from research design to coding to analysis to writing to reporting. Why do I say that? Because it allows us to dig very deeply into our findings. It was said earlier that there's not homogenous experience that military families go through, but there's also like a ton of different things that military families experience. It's really important for us to understand those nuances so that we're not trying to boil the ocean or trying to create a one-size-fits-all solution. What is happening for a E3 family in Texas, who have, 2 kids is going to be very different from an 04 family that's in Rhode Island and, doesn't have kids. And so we have to make sure that we're adapting what we are doing from a programmatic perspective as the research tells us that we should. And recognizing that even within the parameters of the research and the research findings, every single data point, every single experience is valid. And so for us, it's about how do we make sure that we have the data to bring forward, but also understand that we're bringing that data forward in a way that does not diminish any unique experiences. And I think that that is really important for a community that is so proud. When we did the food insecurity work, a few years ago and also recently around the shutdown, we really saw that pride as a key barrier to people getting help. And so for us, it's how can we lower the threshold of entry? How can we help create opportunities for people to come in and get support that is dignified? And really making sure that we are understanding those experiences, understanding how people want to receive information, how people want to receive support, so that we aren't necessarily putting out a solution that's not adapted based on how people want to receive that information, education, or support. So thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be up here with you all.
Sorry. So I'm Meg Cabot, and thank you, Shelley, for the last minute invite to get up here. I'm excited to be here, and as Shelley said, I'm representing Psych Armor, which is a wonderful organization that really tries to help bridge the civilian military divide through a lot of online trainings. They work with a lot of different corporate clients as well as government clients to really make sure that, you know, inside the halls of a large organization like Lockheed Martin or Kaiser Permanente, that they understand what it means to work with veterans, how it might be different to work with veterans, both on the employee side, but also on the client, patient, whatever the whatever the kind of work that organization does. I recently left VA. I have worked at VA in central office for most of my career. I left as I was a senior advisor for a period of time, and then actually left as the chief of staff. So I have a very high level of understanding of how VA works from a leadership perspective. But prior to that, I had spent close to 10 years running the caregiver support program, which is at VA central office. And so and it's probably that program that has the most applicability to what we're talking about, although I certainly could talk about how the Hill uses research, sometimes in good ways and sometimes in bad ways. So we can touch on that if anyone is interested. But the caregiver support program was a program that was implemented in the mid 2010s, right about the time that there was a lot of information and work going on around sort of the silver tsunami. I think that was coined in the early 2000s. AARP was really digging into family caregiving, and more people were starting to talk about what does this mean to be the caregiver of a family member and have to give up your career or whatever it may be, and that there were health implications for the caregiver. So at about the same time, you know, we're in the middle of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Individuals are coming back with truly catastrophic injuries that they never would have survived. And they're not going into long-term care. They're going home with spouses or parents or siblings. And what was the federal government doing to support those individuals? There was a whole infrastructure around supporting spouses often in terms of they could access health insurance and some other things. There was not such an infrastructure for a sibling or parents. So that was sort of step one. But the Hill passed a law, and it sort of was the kitchen sink approach in that there were multiple things that it put in the law that VA was required to do that were designed to support these family caregivers of veterans. And then VA had the very fun job of implementing that particular law. I actually just talked to someone about this yesterday. And the law, for those of you who are familiar with reading law, maybe not too many of you, but laws can sometimes be incredibly prescriptive and very ambiguous all at the same time. They're ambiguous where you wish they were prescriptive, and prescriptive where you wish they were ambiguous. And that's really the sort of the bottom line with VA's program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers. And so one of the things we did early on, VA has always had an incredible research portfolio. A lot of researchers who work in VA, and really amazing pieces of research have come out of VA, things like the liver transplant and the nicotine patch. I just attended an event where we talked about lung screening diagnosis, and VA is doing that better than anybody at this point, and that's really based on research. And so one of the things they had noticed, though, much as we're talking about, is this giant chasm. And so there really started to be this focus on implementation science. And so early on, we developed a partnered evaluation center around the caregiver support program, which meant that research put in some dollars and that the caregiver support program put in some dollars. So we were kind of both on the hook for what was going to come out of that. And we really did great work with a group of amazing researchers out of Duke, and Dr. Courtney Van Houtveen. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with her work, but she's done a lot of work in family caregiving. And we were able to really look at the impact of participation on this program, to look at the sort of both the positives and the not so positives, and also better inform policymakers. And I'll give one short little anecdote, and then we can jump into the rest of the panel here. But one of the things that I kept facing when I would go to the Hill or even to VA leadership was that, well, you know, Meg, your goal must be to keep these veterans out of nursing homes. That was kind of like the holy grail of family caregiving work at that point. If you're supporting the family member, then ultimately it's going to cost the health system less for caring for that veteran. Well, this was a post 9/11 cohort, right? The average age was like 32 when we started. These were not individuals who were going to be in nursing homes, maybe homeless, but not nursing homes. Like that could not be our outcome goal. And so when we started to look at sort of the impact of the program, what we found is that there actually in the beginning was an increase in healthcare utilization. They were going to more primary care appointments. They were going to more specialty care appointments because their caregiver was learning some tools and tricks to convince them to get some treatment, and they were feeling a bit more supported by VA. Over time, however, what we learned is that they were staying out of ERs, and that was going to save more money than, you know, this notion of a very small number of them potentially ending up in a nursing home. So that's sort of one example about how I was able to shift that narrative about the nursing home as being the outcome we were trying to get to.
That's a great example, Meg. And I think it leads very nicely into another question. When we're working with students on our research projects and they're collecting data from us and we give them feedback, we couch it in terms of glows and grows. Here are the things that were glows that you did really well, and here are the places that you can grow. So I'd like to ask others on the panel to reflect a little about your glows and grows in terms of you know, mobilizing data for good. You know, what has gone well? What have you felt really positive about in terms of accomplishments? And what are the grows? What are the things that you wish you could have done differently or better, or that you aspire to do differently or better in terms of using research by others or using data that you yourselves have gathered? So anybody willing to share a glow and a grow? Oh, please.
I'm happy to. So really everything at Blue Star Families is a grow in a way, because all of our programming is based on insight that we've gotten from our research and our surveys. Lindsay Knight over here, Dr. Lindsay Knight is our Chief Impact Officer. We invest about $3 million or $4 million a year in survey impact studies, pulse points, longitudinal studies, evaluation. And we're looking for symptoms, root causes, and upstream solutions. And that started really in the beginning. The symptoms that we saw in our earliest survey, our annual surveys now in its 16th year, and 120,000 people have been surveyed, and we have all that data, and we're very happy to share it with everybody. But we see the mental health problems, and you see the financial insecurity. But do we want to treat those symptoms? Because what it really struck me is that it was odd that we were having these problems. But when you think about social determinants of health, military-connected people are off the chart compared to other Americans in social determinants of health. We're more likely to be married than other people, which is a positive social determinant of health. Military spouses are twice as educated as their civilian counterparts. Someone in the family definitely has a job. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a military family. We have health care. So why do we have these? Not do we have them, but why? And at first we thought, well, maybe it's the military mission, but more survey shows no, the military mission is very motivating. So what is it? It turns out that the people who have moved over and over again and have broken trust networks are unable to solve their own problems, because human beings solve problems through people they know. So that shifted our programming, not to getting more mental health providers out there, although I am by no means against that, but towards the root cause and then the upstream solution. How do we get people connected to friends? And what people wanted, and we asked them, what do you want? It was not a service provider to give them a resource or a government agency to direct them to another agency. They wanted a friend or a neighbor or an element of popular culture to help them and to care about them. And so that's how we started directing our programming towards welcoming and towards activities that got upstream, and then evaluate and measure, are the people who are taking part in these welcoming activities, when they take these surveys, are they less likely to indicate that they're having those problems? So I think that's maybe our primary experience with it. What do I wish we had more of? I want to be able to measure the aggregate. I think it's great to measure individual programs, but people don't live their lives through individual programs. They live their lives through aggregate experiences. So we're commissioning with a social impact research organization to try to get a sense of, are people who in the aggregate are engaged with our chapters, are they doing better overall than people in the aggregate who are not? Just to get that sense, because different people have different preferences and choices about what programs are going to be meaningful or not to them. And I think that kind of view is really the problem we're trying to solve for, not for specific ones.
Thank you for sharing that. Would anyone else like to weigh in on this question?
I can go with this, like our peaches and pits that we do at home. A glow, back in 2019, we were hearing rumblings about challenges with military housing. And we acted quickly. We put a survey out in the field, and we had over 17,000 military families who were currently living in military housing respond in a week. That report, we were able to work with partners to really create, in a lot of cases, what became a key factor in demonstrating that this was not an anecdote, this was not a one-off, this was a systemic problem that was happening, that people were living in subpar, at best in a lot of cases, living conditions. I'd say what my glow is related to that, and Joyce and I were talking about it before this, but there was a meeting that happened that Kathy, Joyce, and I were at the Pentagon when this whole kerfuffle came to be, and just seeing how that data led to significant attention. And then we got to things like a tenant bill of rights. We got to things like studies around, is BAH effective? Is it really getting what people need it to get to? We have a universal lease. We have a tenant dispute resolution process. And so by no means is military housing perfect. In fact, it's far from it. We're continuing to learn. But we are seeing improvements, and we are seeing opportunities for accountability on both sides, which I think is a win. One of the things that I think, though, that is a grow probably for all of us is the things that are persisting in our research and the things that we have not solved for. And we, during the shutdown, launched emergency grocery support for military families. And in 72 hours, over 51,000 military families applied for emergency grocery support. What does that tell us? You mentioned you do financial education. And like what it tells me is that so many people are living on this cusp of just getting by. There's not enough left at the end of that pay period to be able to sustain if there is a delay in pay. And so for me, it's how do we work together? How do we pull every lever possible through research, through programs, through policy to really get at the change that we need to get to? Because emergency grocery support, it is a Band-Aid at best when we're doing it in that situation. We need to get to pay that is, you know, something that a family can live on when you're moving every 2 years. And when military spouses unemployment is sitting between 21 and 24%. And so there are these deep issues that we've been talking about for decades, right? And so for me, that's where I'm like, you know, we need to get at these things. And that's, I think, the opportunity for all of us to come together and look at some of these real issues that we've not been able to solve for, so that we don't find ourselves 20 years from now talking about the same thing.
Please go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to hear what we're all doing, and thanks for sharing. It's great to hear that point too. I'll try and keep it quick. I was thinking of a glow. Our work with report generation and thinking about issues coming up for policy changes. We were given the task of thinking through, well, what does research say about how you staff a program? And my first thought was like, oh, okay, like research on staffing a program, and like how many people do you need to staff a program? Like that's a huge topic. And So we had to put on our creative hats. But when we really dug into the research and got creative and looking at different fields of research, we found that there are indeed studies about what are the primary factors you need to consider when you staff a healthcare program, and then adapting that or adding to that to think about the nuances of the military context. And specifically, this was for a special needs program. We were able to generate, like, here's what basically a formula could look like for how you think about staffing this program. And then ultimately, we pass that off, and it's the policy offices that then, they made it beautiful and contextualized and like truly brought it to the finish line of fruition, which was really, really cool to see that research and policymaking, collaboration there. So that was a real glow moment. Sometimes as a researcher, you write a paper and you don't know, like, if anything ever becomes of it. So that was like a real win. A grow, when I think about our program evaluation research and that first grant proposal we wrote to do that in 2017, it was complex and it was, longitudinal and randomized controlled groups. And, we learned a lot of realistic lessons, and we're still learning those realistic lessons, but we have had to adapt. We have had to downsize and be much more realistic about what is manageable and doable. And so that was those have been some grow moments along the way for sure.
Great, thank you. I'm giving a heads up to people in the room and people online that you're very shortly going to get your opportunity to ask questions. So be thinking about what you would like to ask. So you all work to varying degrees with researchers, academic researchers who are at universities. And of course, Katie, you are at a university, but in that role, you also work with other academic researchers. And so I wanted to open the floor for you to talk a little bit about what do you wish that academic researchers knew or understood better about what you do? Because behind that question is a hypothesis that you've had experiences where people approach you and want to work with you, and what you discover is that it's not really a good fit, in part because they don't have a really good understanding of, where you sit, where you live, what you do. So this is your opportunity to sort of get that stuff out there. So what do you wish? What? Okay, Meg is ready. We will give you the floor.
So a couple of things come to mind quickly. One is that the pace of change within these gigantic federal agencies is very slow, incredibly slow. And, anything that tries to get implemented comes with a piece of change management and convincing people. I mean, I think Dr. Taft talked about being a salesman. I mean, I became the caregiver lady, literally. No matter what was being discussed, I talked about caregivers. And, caregivers could help with this. We were at some big meeting about, access and how we were there were so many no-shows to appointments. And, I immediately said, well, you should be not texting the veteran, you should be texting a family member. And then the veteran's going to go to the appointment. And sort of, became a joke at points, like, oh, great, the caregiver lady is here. But I think that's important, that the pace of change is very slow. The second thing I'm going to say, and I really appreciate you talking about anecdotes a couple of times. Anecdotes have so much power. So when you have the most amazing finding, you have got to match that with an anecdote, because that's how I'm going to convince a senior leader at VA that we need to implement this, by talking about the 92-year-old World War II veteran who actually benefited from this program, and this is how he benefited from it. So, a lot of research that goes on in health services has that sort of qualitative along with the quantitative. Make sure you're pulling out that really good, juicy qualitative stuff, because that's the thing on the slide that sells these programs. Now, the data is very important as well. So I'm not dismissing the data, but make sure that you're really paying attention to that story and that anecdote, because it does have real power.
Thank you.
I would say that similar to the research space, the funding is a challenge, I think, for all of us. So I think that oftentimes it doesn't necessarily come down to if we are able to or if we want to work together, but are the resources there to allow us to be able to work together? One of the things that is a challenge for several nonprofits, for MFAN in particular, is oftentimes people come to us like, oh, well, you do this research, and so can you spend time doing this, frankly, like out of the goodness of your heart because you're a nonprofit? And it's like, well, sure, but I also need to pay people's salaries as well. And so I think that there is a reality check that sometimes we can all have. And I also think that there's an opportunity for, in some cases, nonprofits to push where maybe researchers can't. And that might come down to restrictions within funding agreements. One of the things that got me really fired up and continues to get me fired up is the food insecurity in the military space. And we went to the Pentagon, and they agreed, they acknowledged this for years. This is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. We have the data. Yeah, okay, well, we're looking at it. It's not really an issue. Our data shows that WIC and SNAP enrollment isn't high. Well, no kidding, because you're not eligible for SNAP because the basic allowance for housing. Well, it's showing that the comparability based on civilian pay is there. Okay, but are we looking at that in relation to moving every 2 years and military spouse unemployment? And so finally, we got to the point where, okay, CBS Evening News and Nora O'Donnell, we're going to do a 3-part story together on food insecurity in the military. And guess what? Then everyone paid attention. And so there are things that we can do. We work hard. We always provide embargoed reports to the Pentagon prior to release. That's part of the relationship building. But at the end of the day, we work for military families, right? We don't work for the Pentagon. We don't work for Congress. We work for military families. And so it's making sure that we are pulling the right threads at the right moments so that we can do as much as we possibly can for the people that we're trying to serve.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yes, I think for us, we work on a short fuse, right? Because we're practitioners. We want to affect people's lives right away. I think what we want to offer is that I think, some of the rigor that goes into really excellent academic studies, you're not going to see from us, but the work may still be very valuable and may be a good place for you to look to do that kind of work in the future. And to be more flexible about what is good information. So much of academic work when we started, before we had the resources to do so much of our own research, we looked a lot at academic studies, and much of it was so old, because by the time the work was done and the peer review was done and the publication was done, you're talking about different people living in a different era with different circumstances, and it was of limited use to us. So know that we are interested in what's coming around the bend. What's the force and family of the future going to be like? What are those? Also, the narrowness of academic study is sometimes very frustrating. The Air Force asked me to comment on some work that they were doing to see what the concerns were about schools and what military families wanted from schools. And they had an FFRDC doing the work. And I said, one of the big problems that I have heard anecdotally, and I experienced myself moving my children around, is the lack of recess. And I think that serious parents are very concerned by the way that affects learning. They said, well, that is outside the scope of what we're looking at. So we can't talk to you about that. And I really didn't want to participate in the study anymore. Too often, things are outside the scope, where really human life is outside what everyone puts a frame around. And often the solution, and I'll give you a good example, we did a pulse poll about, the $8,000 out of pocket that the average family spends on relocation in the year that we did that study. $8,000 unreimbursed out of pocket the average family spent. Well, we can't just, I'm a taxpayer too, we can't just give every military family another $8,000 because of that. We looked at the underlying cause. People who had 6 months notice or more had very little out-of-pocket expenses. People who had 2 months notice or less, they had $10,000 or more. And about half the people that year had less than 2 months notice. So the upstream solution is give 6 months notice. Let's not build more housing or write more checks. Let's look behind the data. So I think that's what we'd like to ask for more of.
Great, thank you. I'm really struck the two ends of the panel. Like Meg is talking about how the wheels of government turn very slowly, right? And Kathy, you're talking about how the wheels in the action community move very fast.
Yeah.
But there's often really a disconnect I have found between academic researchers and organizations for precisely this reason. Academic researchers often have day jobs and students and things
Yeah.
that make it difficult, if not impossible, for them to respond in as timely a way as even sometimes funders would like. And so part of the conversation in trying to figure out if a collaboration is possible is to figure out if it is possible to harmonize timelines and to understand each other's constraints and imperatives. Katie, did you want to add to this question?
Well, actually, can I add a little bit to what you just said right there?
Sure.
Riff on that a minute. I can think of a couple of examples. I completely agree that is the challenge. The different timelines, how different organization types move. But there are also really successful examples of how when that works, how great it can be. So like I've had the opportunity to work with the National Military Family Association, utilizing data that they had to study food insecurity and, really provide a piece that got a lot of mileage and attention in the academic research space, looking at rates of food resource utilization. So like that's a good example of what it can look like. I've also been able to partner with Blue Star Families in several ways. We have a project, that has used some of that data to look also at food insecurity, now that I think about it. And look at some differences by like National Guard, Reserve, and active duty populations. I also just had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with your new director of research. There's a study that's in the works, and they're really thinking about, Mallory, theory and how they can collect data and like make sure it's theory driven in what they're collecting. So it was just such a fun brainstorming conversation to kind of infuse research into that very quick rapid release work that's going on. So just kind of two quick examples to throw in.
All right, I would like to invite people in the room and people online to submit questions. We have just a few minutes left, and I have a question to ask if others don't, but I would like to privilege people in the room. So what questions do we have in the room or online? Joyce. Wait, thank you.
So one of the things that kind of got touched on this morning was the idea that folks without a military background, military family background, who are doing groundbreaking family in general research can inform those of us in the military space. How would you like, in an ideal world, how would you like to develop more relationships with people who are doing family research, where, is there a way that you could work to influence that, but also gain more insights into what's happening with families in general in the United States, so that we get to what's military and what's just being family in the 21st century?
I can start. Joyce, I think it's a really important piece, because I think that sometimes we ostracize ourselves as military families when there are a lot of things that are similar points. There are unique challenges, don't get me wrong, but there are also a lot of through lines that exist between military and civilian. And I think sometimes that 1% conversation can be damaging. One thing that, an example, one of some of our friends who worked at the White House Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition, I had an incredible opportunity to be on a panel and share some of the research that we did around the causal factors that lead to food insecurity among military families. We interviewed over 3,000 military families. And the key point there was those are the same challenges in most cases that face the civilian population. There was one nuance, and that was, I guess you couldn't even call it that, but the move piece, right? When you're moving every 2 years. But if you're in a nomadic population, if you're in a population that's requiring you to move for your job outside the military, there are just a lot of those threads. And I think that sometimes we inadvertently isolate ourselves and create, in some cases, I think we have to solve our problems for ourselves. The Pentagon has done a lot of that, some not always being as collegial as we want to as far as public-private collaboration to work together to address issues. And so I think that the more that we can have the big tent conversations and share those lessons learned, we have to. The reality is that survey fatigue is real, compassion fatigue is real. And so those are things that we're all working together against. And so if we can not necessarily look at just the differences, but really where are those common through points that American families are, experiencing, military or otherwise.
Other questions?
Jefferson. Oh.
No, Mallory's got the mic.
Can I add to that question? That Joyce just asked? So I think that's a great opportunity, right? Someone should sponsor an event, right? Let's get some really great panels around some of these themes around that we know exist in the rest of the country as well, not just around military families, and really think through partnership. I mean, I'll give one, here's sort of an example, right? In the family caregiving universe, there used to be, I think there still is, but sort of this very divide between family caregivers and paid caregivers, right? Now, some family caregivers are paid. Some paid caregivers actually support family members too. Now, obviously, they each have unique challenges, unique stresses, that sort of a thing. Now, the White House Council on Aging, I went to, that must have been close to 10 years ago at this point. I sort of had this argument with some policy folks at the White House about how those two groups were exactly the same and we were not going to treat them differently. And, I was very adamant that that was not true. They were different and we needed to talk about them differently. But I will say most recently, the current administration has put out an AI competition around supporting family caregivers, which is really interesting. And they actually separate those two groups. They say we want interventions that's going to support family caregivers, but we also want interventions that are going to support, more professional caregivers. And so it's that big tent concept. And I think that there are other places where we could do that kind of work. I will say one of my biggest frustrations working at VA Central Office is the House Veterans Affairs Committee and the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee do not play well with other committees that impact real veterans' lives and things like housing and food insecurity. There will be this amazing piece of legislation from a different committee that does not talk about veterans, does not include veterans as part of the discussion. That to me is a huge challenge that if we could get over that, we wouldn't be having these kinds of discussions.
Thank you.
I just wanted to throw out that CNA helped sponsor a research panel, a research conference with Blue Star Families and Military Child Education Coalition many years ago on what builds resilience in military children. But about 80% of the researchers they invited did only work on children in general. And we did that conference 2 years in a row, and they had come up with funding for it, then it was gone. But it was phenomenal. And a lot of those learnings informed so much of what we did. It's the most important thing to a child's well-being is the mother's mental health, right? So you have to really focus on the mother's mental health. People can take hits if they believe it's for a purpose. The family you have to underscore the value and the purpose. So I think these kinds of things, it'd be great to get them back again. I think to Shannon's earlier point, the funding is the challenge, but so valuable if you could do them.
I'll offer a last opportunity to people in the room. Anybody got a question? Right, well then I'm gonna close us out by giving you each an opportunity to give a brief piece of advice. We have researchers in the room, we have researchers in the virtual world with us. And if you could give one piece of advice to a researcher who's really interested in doing a project that is going to have impact or be useful to people who are like on the front lines, really working with families. maybe this is someone who's never really done that before. Maybe they would love to meet you and have never had the opportunity to do it. What's the one thing you would tell them they could or should do that would help them achieve their goal of having impact on the front lines with folks like you?
I can go first. The thing that pops to mind is go to the front line. You know, in my own experience, I think going out and meeting people, really getting to know them made a world of difference in how I saw military families, how I was thinking about military families, and how I was able to make a difference. So I just think there's no replacement for that kind of real world engagement.
So I'm going to say the opposite of that. And if you are frontline doing research, go to the senior people. I mean, I have a very specific example. There's actually quite a bit of research going on around family caregiving in VA when the caregiver support stood up. Most of it was with an older population. Some of it was very disease specific, like how does engaging family members impact cardiac health after a cardiac event, that sort of a thing. But I had a couple of very junior researchers reach out to me and say, hey, can we talk about this caregiving research that I'm doing? And I was able to connect them to other people and really think about things from a policy perspective and give them some insight about doing that on the from a research side. So you know, feel free if you're doing great work, and you know who the senior policy person is, because you can, especially within VA and same in DoD, you can often go in the global outlook there and find those people. You should be cold outreaching to them and asking them questions and seeing if you can engage with them somehow.
Thank you so much. Shannon?
Trust is paramount. The military community, Brand's going to laugh when I say this, our director of government relations, but can be squirrely, right? And when we think about that, when we think about asking people to share very vulnerable experiences, that's hard. That's, I think, especially hard in the military community where you're really trained to be tough, to have that exterior. And I think that that's where partnerships can be very powerful. And so when you have 51,000 people ask for grocery support in 72 hours, that tells you a lot, but it also tells you that they trusted us to ask for help. And so I think that whenever we can work together and make 1 + 1 = 3, that is intentional. That's not just bad math this time. I think that's important. And I think that we can all lean in together and show military families that we're here to do the right thing at the right moment for the right reasons, and that we can't do that alone, any one organization.
Really concurring. I think relationships are everything. And so when you're starting out, talk to people who have relationships with those people who you're trying to study to understand them. I'll also invite you to come to Blue Star Families if we can be helpful. We have a heat map of where all of our people are. We have people registered with us, so we know what rank, what military service, all of those kinds of things. We're interested in collaborating. The more intelligence there is about our community, the better off all of us are. So it's really an open invitation.
Thank you so much. Can we thank our panel before we transition to our last activity? Thank you so much. I invite you to return to the room, and I invite everybody to make sure that you're at a table where you can have a bit of discussion, because I'm going to give you something to talk about briefly, and we'll generate some ideas. Thank you so much again. All right, we're going to move into our last session. It's becoming a bit of a tradition, but there'll be a little new twist this afternoon, maybe. We have ended this event a few times now by asking you to engage in some discussion to complete this sentence. Wouldn't it be great if? And those of you who know Nora Spinks know that this was a suggestion that she made. Wouldn't it be great if? The Thompson platform is a stepping stone to achieving these wishes. For example, one participant in the past wished that it was easier to know what research to trust and how to understand how to use it. The Thompson list now identifies the best of the best each year and makes those studies available to the larger community so that practitioners and researchers can interact and together generate insights about how to apply research findings. Another participant wished that researchers were more accessible to the organizations and communities who align with their findings. Once again, the Thompson platform aims to shrink that gap. We have big dreams and we look forward to continuing and growing this effort. Another example from a recent year was, wouldn't it be great if there was a space and resources for investing in research practitioner partnerships? And as a result, we created the Measuring Communities Data Champions program. And I'm sorry that David Link left, because Cohen was one of our partners. He's with us in spirit online this afternoon. So through the program, our Measuring Communities staff partners with organizations that serve military-connected people. And our team works with the organization to create a data profile about that organization's community of interest. Then we and the organization, the partner organization, can use the data to explore how to help the organization make a business decision. And so, again, something that grew directly out of the insights generated in this room. Excuse me. So we're going to do the same thing this year. If you're in the room, I believe you will be seeing a QR code on the screen, or you can go to slido.com at that link. You can type in the link, and for those online, the prompt will pop up automatically for you. I would love it if you would, in the room, spend a little bit of time at your tables, 10 minutes or so, talking about this idea just to get the creative juices flowing. And then I'll invite you to submit your ideas, and we'll see a little bit what we have learned. Those of you in the room, maybe Ari, you can in a minute turn the screen off so the people in the room can't crib from the people online until we've had a little bit of discussion. But we'll come back together to look at what we've learned. And then I will tell you about a new little adventure that we're going to be embarking on in the coming year that y'all are on the inside track for. So 10 minutes, just talk amongst yourselves about, wouldn't it be great if, and then we'll invite you to enter those into the Slido link. So please, give it some thought. Now that you've had a little bit of a chance to get the creative juices flowing, please start getting your ideas flowing into Slido, or if you want, just write them on Post-its at your table. We'll take them any way we can get them. We'll reconvene in about 3 or 4 minutes. Okay. I think it would be great for us to hear just a little bit about what has happened at these table discussions. So Macy's got the microphone. Is there someone, could we have like one idea from each table that came up? Is there somebody want to share one on it? Please stand so everybody can see you, even though you've got the mic. Yes, tell us what you talked about at your table.
So we talked about two things. The first thing that we talked about was, wouldn't it be great if there was more senior VA representation here? And then the other thing that we talked about was the importance of state policy coordination as well. So how do you coordinate state and federal policies? And then how do you also ensure state policy representation is a part of?
Awesome, thank you. Could you pass the microphone to this table? Yeah, right where you are. Yep, Katie, somebody at your table just share what you talked about?
I guess since I have the remote, it is not a remote, it's a microphone. I will share. We had a similar comment in regards to the one that was shared about VA presence. DoD presence would be a nice wish list item. Let's see. We also talked about, wouldn't it be great if graduate students who are, preparing to be researchers, received more of the training early on in their career to think about policy connections and implications. We were talking about how, those of us who do that sort of thing in the research world really kind of learned it on the fly or in the process. And so kind of being more intentional early on in that training. Let's see, I cannot read my handwriting anymore. Oh, more graduate student presence was something. I know we have some online, but we thought that graduate students here would align with that desire. Anything?
Awesome. Thank you. About the back table over there, Will, would you like to share something?
Sure. So we were thinking a little bit about how could we maybe put all of these studies in a little bit more context. And so the thought was, we create like the life cycle of a military family's challenges. So there can be challenges in just day-to-day life, the stressors of dropping off at daycare and kids are fighting, the pre-deployment stressors, the on-deployment stressors, the post-deployment stressors, coming back with injuries, without injuries, with separation, with retirement, with not. and then against that continuum, plotting these studies to say, where do these fit? And sometimes they might span a couple of different areas. And then where are there gaps that maybe aren't covered as much? And they might not just be research studies, they could also be practices from the field that are working. And so, it's a unifying life cycle that also, when you listen to a study, you immediately put it in the context of where this fits on that continuum.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know there have been efforts at part of that, but I think they're not as readily available as maybe we might like. I'm going to go ahead and move us along because I don't want to keep you late for class. I want you to be able to get on your way in a timely way. So we've been very inspired by the ideas that people have generously shared with us each year, and each year they have guided us to do new things. And in fact, the revisioning of the Thompson platform has, I think, been inspired by the enthusiasm and the thoughtfulness that you and others have brought to this event over the years. So I'm very happy to report that we've received some funding that will allow us to do some work between now and the next 2 years to actually try to build on the momentum from today's conversations to try to create some partnerships between researchers and practitioners to help them get to know each other better, assess their mutual readiness perhaps for collaboration, think about some ways to try to help organizations who may know that they want to evaluate something but may not know how to get going with that or how to make that real, or want to collaborate with a researcher but don't quite know how to get that to happen. Or similarly, researchers who are eager to work with organizations in the field or would love to help an organization that actually has some data, even if the organization can't pay them. Maybe there's a project that can be done that would be mutually beneficial. So early in the new year, we're going to be soliciting expressions of interest from both participants and also maybe some prospective partners who have experience and expertise and might be willing to kind of help nurture these prospective or potential collaborations. And of course, we'll be reaching out to anyone who has participated in the Thompson in any way. And it's just another little way to try to build a bridge across this chasm and try to help organizations and researchers who are trying to do good work to find ways to work together effectively to do more good work and maybe better work. So please stay tuned. And if this interests you, you would like to know more, or you would like me to have a conversation with you about your thoughts about where it ought to go or how it ought to go, please let us know. We're going to build the plane as we fly it, as we often do. And we are excited about it and eager to have participation from across the military and veteran community family space. So as we close today's event, I want to express my sincere appreciation to all of you for coming, but also all of the folks who made today's event possible. I want to thank Barbara, who set all of the things in motion that made it possible for us to create a Thompson Award. I'd like to thank Mr. Simmons for taking time out of his extraordinarily busy day to join us today. I'd like to thank our AUSA partners, Karen Halverson, and also her good colleague Thea, that we could not function without, and Holly Daly, who also we work with closely, but Holly was on travel today. I want to thank Dr. Stephen Erath for joining us from Auburn. That was an unexpected and very special treat. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. I want to thank Mallory and Katie and our REACH partners for all of the work that they do to make it possible to get to today. And then you both got starring roles today. So, and Katie didn't know she was going to have that. So thanks to you both. And of course, I want to thank all of the people that I'm very honored to work with at MFRI, Macy, who you've interacted with a lot, Trisha, who's been out there that I know many of you interacted with. Oh, there he is. Or there she is. Ari is in a room down the hall. He's like the voice from God sending me messages here at the front of the screen. Thanks to Ari. The things that are on the tables look beautiful. Thanks to Allison. And many other people have had their hands involved in this effort. And I'm very grateful to work closely with them every day. It's a real honor. And we have several MFRI Advisory Council members here today who to whom I'm also extraordinarily grateful. So thank you all for coming. Sincere best wishes for a meaningful and hopefully relaxing holiday season as much as you can. And I look forward to seeing you approximately a year from now, maybe in this same room, maybe with some more exciting new news to share. Thank you all very much.